We all share the same planet. We've benefited from an abundance of natural resources and a stable climate for more than 10,000 years. Global commons. These are the gifts from the forests, from the oceans, and from biodiversity. But now, our planet is in danger. Beyond planetary boundaries.
We have only 10 years to bend the curve of GHG emissions. Science is very clear. We are losing species 1,000 times the natural rate.
We are the cause. Humans have become the overwhelming force determining future living conditions on Earth. This is a geological era known as Anthropocene, and the tipping point is just around the corner. Building a new framework to ensure the survival of global commons. That will be our responsibility, achieved under our stewardship. 5 new systems will be needed for renewable energy, sustainable food, greener cities, a circular economy, and digitalization or cyber global commons. These systems will be necessary to pass on a healthy and prosperous planet to the next generation. And now, global experts are discussing the solutions at Tokyo Forum 2020 online.
Good evening from Tokyo, and welcome to the second day of Tokyo Forum 2020 online. I'm Hiroko Kuniya, the facilitator for this year's forum. The focus of this year's forum is Global Commons Stewardship in the Anthropocene. Human activity has gone so big that we're putting tremendous stress on the planet, and the planet is losing its resilience. We have to drastically and quickly change our system so that we can restore the health of the planet and also become effective stewards of the Earth system. The question is, how do we do it? Let me introduce Naoko Ishii. She is the content producer of this year's forum, and she is the inaugural director of the Center of Global Commons in the Tokyo University. Naoko-san, let's look back briefly on what we did the first day. First, we looked at why humanity has to become stewards of the global commons now. And we heard a very powerful message that we only have 10 years. The next 10 years will be critical in transforming the ways we live, right? And then we also heard about the COVID-19, the impact. Whether or not COVID-19 can be a game changer for transforming our planet for sustainability, and there is a chance if we invest heavily on green projects. And there are signs on positive signs, but the scale and impact is not enough. So what do we do the second day?
Thank you, Kuniya-san. Hello to everyone. I was so excited yesterday to see this big concept of global commons and Anthropocene are getting its recognition. But the biggest takeaway to me is, as you said, that we have only 10 years left to change the course. Particularly, I was so frightened to hear that after 2030, we will lose the control over our fate. This means next 10 years, we have to find a way to implement what we have promised.
Right.
That has a very significant meaning to Japan and Korea, along China, who have very recently actually declared the net zero and carbon by 2050.
Exactly.
It's a beautiful statement, but do we really have a means to implement it? Yesterday we hear, I think from Christiana Figueres, that because of those recent commitments, the countries, the GDPs who are under this commitment is growing from 25% to 70%. It sounds great. But unless we are able to implement it,
right.
that it's just any kaitamochi in Japanese, it's pies in the sky. So we really need to find a way to implement it. And this has been the missing piece for until very recently. And my focus for today is, can this forum actually provide the meaningful instruments to implement those commitments?
We have never been responsible for governing the Earth system. Right. The planet has been so generous to us. So it is a big challenge, but I hope we can find some concrete pathways to be able to steer ourselves towards sustainability. We have been inviting viewers to send in their comments, their questions, their feedback, and please use the Slido link, which is shown below your screen. So let's start. So to restore the resilience of the planet, we have to kickstart drastic transformation of our systems. Incremental changes will not suffice. So Naoka-san, we need to first understand our social economic systems, which are very complex if we're going to be very successful in transforming. And the Global Commons Stewardship Index, which the Center of Global Commons is working on, please explain what they are.
Right. We have just emphasized this importance of implementation. The challenges can we provide with a meaningful, practical methods to do it. And yesterday, there are quite a good hints from the conversation. Jeffrey Sachs and others emphasized the need for long-term planning, importance of the scenario analysis, but we need a little bit more than that. Particularly like a business sector emphasized that we need a multi-stakeholder coalition, but another very important thing is how we can guide the individual action, be it it's a country or the citizens, the consumer, investors, and this particular index is really trying to provide the guiding post to countries to change their behavior. It has the meaning of how to measure that the negative or positive contribution of each of country towards the safeguarding global commons. And then the importance of it is that it shows that there are diverse way of contributing the global commons. It's not just the emission, that there will be to how to restore that biodiversity in the water and the oceans. So it provides a kind of diverse way of contribution, but then we want to publish those index to spur the policy discussion. And the end goal is that can we create a science-based community to govern the global commons. And we will hear the team from the team. Here is already the report and published actually today.
Wow.
So that
congratulations.
Thank you so much. And we would like to hear from the team how this index could actually guide the action of each of the country.
Okay, so let's hear from the panelists, and let's me introduce the moderator, who is Jeremy Oppenheim, who is the co-founder of Systemic. Jeremy?
Great. Well, thank you so much for Naoko and the whole team for the invitation to moderate what is going to be an outstanding panel. And it is fantastic to hear the message from yesterday, which is the challenge that's been presented, but the incredible opportunity that we all have to, in a sense, get our act together and put in place the stewardship framework for the global commons. And the purpose of this panel specifically is to discuss the role of a new index focused on country performance in stewarding the global commons. And of course, when we talk about the global commons, and I'm sure this was discussed at some length yesterday, what we mean by that specifically are the Earth systems that sustain life within the planetary boundaries. And the index, we believe, can become a key tool for the new Centre for the Global Commons to achieve and to contribute to that overall stewardship. And certainly the Centre itself is arriving and being set up at such an important moment. I mean, in some ways, of course, one would, if we could replay time, wish that the Centre had been set up a decade ago. But we are where we are, and the fact that the University of Tokyo has established this new centre, in truth, as a global public good to address what is now a crisis in the global commons, the failure over many decades to steward the Earth systems, those of land and freshwater, oceans and the atmosphere, as well as critical biomes such as Amazon and the Arctic, which sustain life. The fact that we have now to act decisively and to get to grips with that crisis, and not only to sort of, in a sense, remind ourselves of the problem, but the joy of the deep intent of the Centre under Naoko's leadership, and with the support of the whole University of Tokyo, is to identify and lead solutions, and that is very much what this panel is going to focus on, and within it the particular, if you will, mechanisms that can enable the socioeconomic transformations that are required. The specific moment that we're at is, of course, one in which we are beginning to see a shift in the way in which countries are understanding their own actions and conduct and the implications of them in the particularly climate sphere. We, of course, hope to see that extended beyond climate into other domains of the global commons. But it is wonderfully exciting for those of us that have worked on climate for many years to see the way in which countries and companies are now starting to enter into what feels like a high ambition loop around net zero commitments. And of course, Naoko, you just mentioned this, but it was tremendous to see Japan and Korea enter the net zero club. And sitting here parochially in the United Kingdom, the fact that the UK, which is president of the COP next year, is now pushing for 68% emission reductions by 2030 is nothing short of a revolution. So while I recognise that there's much more work to do, and that applies as much to climate as it does to the other global commons, we are beginning to see and to understand how the combination of good science, credible metrics, and mechanisms which create these positive ambition loops can lead to real changes in the way in which states, investors, and companies behave. So it is this kind of work, the development of these mechanisms which change the conduct of key actors in the global system and changes that conduct in ways that create new patterns of enlightened self-interest with the stewardship of the global commons. It is at the very heart of this wonderful new Centre for the Global Commons, directed by Dr. Naoko Ishii and hosted as a global public good by the University of Tokyo, that we are going to dive a little bit deeper into through the lens of the Global Commons Stewardship Index, or GCSI. So the way the panel is going to work is that I will first hand over to Guido Schmidt-Traub, who is Executive Director of the United Nations, or the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, which together with Yale University has developed the index. And Guido will take us through a proper explanation of the way in which the index has been developed, and will present both the potential for that impact, but for the index, and also offer us a sense of the journey that we have to go on to make this index truly powerful. So I'm going to hand first to Guido, and then I will, at the end of his presentation, introduce you to each of the other panelists in turn. And it's a huge honor to be here, and without further ado, let me hand over now to Guido.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Thank you, Naoko. It's a great honor to be here. And it's an even greater pleasure to present the fruits of some hard but very preliminary work. And I want to, at the outset, just recognize three institutions that have worked extremely well together in producing this pilot Global Commons Stewardship Index. That's first and foremost, of course, the Center for Global Commons under Naoko Ishii's leadership, Yale University, the center led by Professor Dan Esty, who is going to speak in a moment, has been a wonderful partner. And of course, I want to acknowledge the tremendous work of my colleagues at the SDSN. We're presenting here, and I hope you can see the slides, and we would go to the next slide. We're presenting here if we go to the next slide, please. We're presenting here the very first pilot version of the Global Commons Index. We know that what doesn't get measured doesn't get tracked, doesn't get understood, and doesn't get acted upon. So this is why Naoko Ishii very wisely made data for the Global Commons a priority. There are three broad types of data that we should be thinking about. We heard yesterday a lot about the state of the global commons, the climate systems, biodiversity, oceans. And of course, we have made tremendous advances in recent years on this, but more needs to be done to improve that data. That's one type of data that we need. The second is to understand what is it countries are contributing to them. What are the impacts that countries have on the global commons? Because at the end of the day, most policies are set at national levels. And we need every country to act, and we need to learn from one another. A third type of data then looks at what are the actual policies that countries have on the books that they have that they're planning to implement to identify gaps. This is something which, for example, in the climate space, the Climate Action Tracker has been doing, and this is a priority that we have identified with colleagues at the Center for Global Commons, something to work on. And perhaps a fourth category, which is not on the slide here, is business data, business metrics. And just to be clear, we're situating ourselves here on the second point. We're putting forward today for the first time a very preliminary pilot version for discussion and improvement of data that tracks country impacts on the global commons. So if we go to the next slide, we will briefly just recap the objectives of this. Number one is we want to use data to raise awareness and attention to the global commons. So over time, we want to, and next year, we want to start ranking countries. And these rankings are never perfect, but they draw attention to it because nobody wants to be the worst performer on any ranking. And this is as much a communication and a policy political challenge as it is a technical one of raising awareness on the global commons. Second is we want to more clearly understand and highlight global trends, trends across the globe at national levels and priorities. Where are the biggest implementation gaps? Which countries are doing better? And as you'll see, we're seeing for countries at a similar level of development, we're seeing a wide variation in performance, which gives us hope that you can maintain the same living standards and do much, much better than you're doing. And then obviously we want to motivate better national policies and also at the international level, because all of global commons need to be better managed at international level. Think of the high seas, for example. And then there is a final point, which is the need to identify and close data gaps. So if we go to the next slide, please, we will see, just to outline and click once more, please. We'll see the structure of the index. First, we are identifying the domestic impact. So what are countries doing? What negative environmental impacts do they create within their boundaries, within their territories? And we're looking at 6 broad dimensions here. So that's aerosols, which are of course driven by air pollution, biodiversity, climate change, land and land use change, impact on the oceans and on fresh water. And if we click once more, we'll see that we have a similar structure for the international spillovers. Could you please click the slide once more? And just click twice more. There are 2 more data points, which we can just put up here. We'll see the spillovers on the international side, which follow the same structure. So for every country, we're basically developing a score of what are the domestic impacts and what are the international impacts. If we could please click, we'll see that at the domestic level, we have 23 indicators, and click once more, please, at the spillover at the international level, we have 11 indicators. So this gives you a sense of the range of data that we've been able to identify today. And of course, there are significant gaps that we want to close. On the next slide, please, we will see the basic method for this pilot version to compare performance, where we are every index is converted into a score, where we score countries' performance relative to target achievement. In other words, we define for each indicator what are the thresholds that countries need to achieve in order to ensure a sustainable management of the global commons. This is all described in the report that Naoko-san has held up today, which can be downloaded on a web page. And essentially, these are all science-based thresholds. And on that, once we aggregate the scores, we're able to rate countries, just like sovereign bond ratings, from AAA down to CCC. On the next slide, we have summarized, we've described the country coverage. This is the first version. We are able to include 50 countries. And essentially, we're including the G20, other OECD countries, plus countries not included in that group that have a population greater than 100 million people. So these are really the largest countries. If we start at the richest ones, if we start at if we look at the next slide, just to give you a sense of the results, you'll see here, summarized. I don't expect you to be able to read this again. I defer to the report. We have for every country here the overall score, and then the domestic and the spillover data. The first thing that jumps out that there isn't a green, there isn't a light green, so no country is achieving anything close to the necessary scores. All countries have significant negative impacts. Once you dig a little bit deeper, you'll see that in particular the rich countries have got very, very high negative spillover effects. Those spillovers are less pronounced in developing countries. On the next slide, please, you'll see just, and the slide before described per capita impacts, so adjusted for the size of the population in each country. Here, we've just presented the total absolute impact of the 10 countries with the largest impacts. These are presented in alphabetical order, so this is not a ranking. We'll do that next year. But you see that it basically includes the large, rich, and then countries, but also the countries with a very large population, China, India in particular. And I think that's important. We need to look at both per capita contributions. So Singapore, Luxembourg score quite poorly on that front, but also the overall contribution. On the next slide, just by way of an illustration, you'll see the country data. I won't go into this in more detail here, just illustratively for Sweden and Indonesia. You'll see the overall score, but then also the scores for domestic and spillovers across these 6 dimensions: aerosols, biodiversity, oceans, and so forth, which I described at the outset. The next slide, please, shows just illustratively, gives you a sense of the richness of the data that we have on the country profiles. So the report that we've put out includes detailed country profiles, and these are useful for understanding better what's happening in the country, but also give us an indication of the data gaps that we need to fill. And I know some of the panelists will speak on this. Just to move to the next findings, to the initial findings on the next slide, please. Very quickly, the first, as already mentioned, no country comes even close to having a satisfactory performance on the global commons. Second, there are very large international spillovers. The largest impacts, as already mentioned, come from China, the European Union, India, Japan, Russia, and USA, and that's driven by a combination of living standards, which correlate, of course, with negative impacts on global commons and the size of the population. And there are major data gaps. One thing I do want to highlight is that once you look more deeply at the data, you'll see significant variation in performance across countries, particularly across rich countries, which should be an inspiration for those that perform poorly to see what policies they might consider learning from other countries in order to improve their performance. Very final, on the next slide, please, just to outline the next steps. We have emphasized that this is a pilot version. We expect it will take about 3 years of hard work and iterations to close some of the gaps, to refine the methodology. And that's really the beginning of the journey that we are launching today. So the first priority is to consult with experts. We are cognizant of the many, many gaps. We want to bring in more social data from the social sciences in particular. And so we will be consulting here. And you'll also, if you go onto the Center for Global Commons website, you'll find not only the reports there, but you'll also find a form where you can submit feedback. Second is we've identified a few methodological improvements. I just mentioned them quickly. We can come to them in a discussion. We'll add more indicators. We want to close data gaps, particularly on spillovers, and are working with various teams there. We want to present time series data so that you can get a sense of trends. Are we going in the right direction? Are we going even in the wrong direction? We want to review what's called distance to goal achievement. So how do we score countries on a scale of 0 to 100 on each target? What are the right thresholds? And that's, of course, we're working with Johan Rockström and other leading scientists to get these right. And as mentioned, we want to produce rankings so that this can generate even more attention. And finally, of course, we're working on dissemination. Let me close with the next slide, please, which just gives you our contact details. I want to acknowledge in particular the two team leaders, Zach Wendling from Yale and Guillaume Lafortune from the SDSN. We set up a simple email, gcs@unsdsn.org, where you can reach out to us. But you can also do so, of course, through the website of the Center for Global Commons. So with this, Jeremy, back to you to London.
Guido, thank you so much. And that was such an inspiring and rapid tour of, I think, an index which feels like it's taken its first steps today. I mean, I know there've been some, if you will, there's been a period of development and gestation already, but what a wonderful contribution and a way to kick off the panel. And I think we'll look back in 3 years and 5 years' time, because these things do take a bit of time to go on their own S-curve, right, of impact. But I think we'll look back in 5 years' time on today and the launch of the index under the auspices of the Center for Global Commons, and it will be one of those moments that will actually make a small, if you will, shift in the way in which we hold the world and we actually take on that responsibility for the stewardship of the global commons. So I think this is it can sometimes feel quite technical, but I actually felt at moments a little bit emotional listening to you lay this out for the first time. So thank you so much. Dan, can I turn to you for some thoughts? So for those that don't know Dan Esty, and I'm sure everybody on this webinar does, Dan Esty is the professor at the Yale School of Environment and Law, and he has been intimately involved in this exercise. And I know, Dan, you will have your own observations, and we particularly appreciate that this is, I think, still, before 6:30 in the morning. So thank you so much for joining us early on in your day.
Jeremy, thank you so very much. And thank you all for being part of what I hope will quickly turn into a conversation. I am up early, but the planet needs us to be up early to address the kind of issues that Guido has laid out. And frankly, the conversation yesterday made very clear. So let me just start by saying thank you to President Gonakami. I salute you for your vision in setting out the theme of this year's 2020 Tokyo Forum, and beyond that, the new center. And Naoko, congratulations on the launch of your center, and thank you for now decades of leadership, thought leadership on this issue of the global commons. And it is a great privilege to work with you in creating this index. And I am thrilled by the conception that you've laid out and that we are together building across our three institutions. It is truly a collaborative effort and an important partnership. And we do lay out the first steps here today. And I want to, over the next few minutes, just highlight the value of an index, why you thought, Naoko, and why we at Yale and Guido and his team at the SDSN all believe that there is value in this exercise. And to start with, I think it is really important to reflect on what we're doing. We are trying to bring tangibility to something I call the sustainability imperative. And that is the argument that you heard laid out in a variety of ways yesterday, that we are at risk of breaching critical planetary boundaries. Johan Rockström, of course, has been one of the leaders in laying that out. From a policy perspective, I summarize it as the idea that we need to make sustainability a foundational principle of life in the 21st century. And how do we do that? In part, I would argue, with data and metrics and the summation of all that into an index and a scorecard. And in the spirit of our host institution, the University of Tokyo, I want to highlight one more point. Johan warned us yesterday about the risk of breaching boundaries, of passing beyond critical thresholds. I want to today talk about boundaries we must cross. And I'm thinking here of disciplinary boundaries. And for too long, academics have worked in narrow niches, natural science in one space, social science in another space, and even sometimes a third dimension of the policy domain. And what is critical about this index is it provides a tool for bringing the natural science to bear, the best social science, and feeding it into the policy arena in the form of a signal of an index and a guide to what needs to be done. So I want to quickly just outline what I think the opportunity here is. And frankly, it is a big one. And it does build on work that some of us have been doing for decades. The team at Yale has been developing now for more than 20 years an environmental performance index. Guido and his team have been tracking performance, national performance against the Sustainable Development Goals. And we have seen already how these structures, these indices, allow us to spot problems, to look for and identify potential breaches in those planetary boundaries. An index allows us to track trends, identify where some issues are being addressed and we're seeing improvements. And by the way, it's not all bad news. We are, in fact, improving results in terms of protection of the ozone layer. And we've done that through careful global governance and a response to an identified, natural science identified problem. But there is deterioration and there is a downtrend in terms of where we need to be on a number of these issues. And I do think the index allows us to look, as Guido already suggested, both at a global scale, but starting with the national scale. The global scale is important because it tells us, particularly with regard to the global commons, whether we together are getting where we need to be. But then there is an important ability with this index to take that analysis apart and attribute responsibility national government by national government, because it is at that level, as Guido pointed out, that so many decisions get made. It also allows us, this index, to identify leaders and to highlight, frankly, laggards. And in doing so, understand what the best practices might be for addressing any of these problems. And what we can do with those best practices is disseminate them and help other nations get onto that track of what good performance looks like. I think we see, looking forward, a lot of work to do to ensure that this capacity, and the key tool here is comparative institutional analysis, looking at how we as a national governments, or sometimes city or state scale governments, provincial governments, but then ultimately a global governance process, how we are doing in terms of how we think about problems, conceptualize them, respond to them. And we really do need that comparative analysis to bring forth the best that we have available. So I want to just close by saying I see enormous promise in this product. And as Guido mentioned, the Pilot Global Commons Stewardship Index is available on the Tokyo Forum website. So I encourage you all to go and begin today what we consider today to be, which is not just the launch of an index, but the beginning of a long conversation about how we together are going to manage. And by the way, there's a feedback form there on the website as well to tell us whether this panel today, whether this entire forum is delivering on your expectations. And we want to start that process and encourage it with a certain degree of humility. We know we are launching something today, but there's a lot of work to do. Over time, I think it can provide insights on the policy challenges and, frankly, insights on how we are doing in terms of global governance. It can, and this was highlighted yesterday by Jeff Sachs and others, provide incentives by identifying leaders and laggards to spur improvement, to spur innovation, to help change behavior. It can also steer investment. There is inevitably limited funds to address these problems. We need to target those funds to the most critical challenges and the most promising policies. And I do think Guido again indicated to us that our spirit must be iterative. We must be engaged in a process of continuous improvement and recognition that we're going to need better data over time, better methodologies, and we hope that will drive better policies. So please allow me to close where I started by saying thank you for this collaborative opportunity. Special gratitude to the University of Tokyo and the leadership there of Naoko with the new center and President Gonakami for the broader setting into which this program will go. We do have lots to do. The planet needs us, so let's get on with it.
Dan, thank you so much for your inspiring comments. And I mean, I took away from it the kind of 4 key propositions of how the index is going to contribute to this movement, not just a conversation about global stewardship, but a movement, right, for stewardship of the global commons. Measurement and getting the data that enables that measurement, accountability, leadership, right, and this comparative institutional analysis, allowing for that comparison to drive and accelerate the diffusion of best practice and to push us beyond best practice, because I think we will need to be into transformative practice, not just best practice. So that was fantastic. Let me now,
Jeremy, I can't help but offer you an A as a professor for having distilled out the key messages of Guido's presentation and my own. So thank you.
Well, that's great, because it's about the first A I've ever had, Dan, in my entire life. So I appreciate that. Right, let me pass on at this moment to my very good friend and Janis Potočnik, co-chair of the UN International Resource Panel. And Janis, just far away. Thoughts? How do we make this as powerful and useful as it can possibly be?
Thank you, Jeremy. Good day to everybody, and thank you for inviting me to contribute to this discussion. Global Commons should drive our efforts, and the index is an important tool to step up our efforts in this direction. A science-based contribution to multilateral governance, which we hope will ultimately drive countries to take decisive action towards the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. As some of you know, I'm currently a co-chair of UNEP International Resource Panel, a science policy interface in the area of natural resource management. The way we treat natural resources to a large extent determines economic results, as well as environmental and health impacts. In other words, natural resources are the bridge between economy and competitiveness on one hand, and climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, and health implications on the other. This is an important ingredient linked also to the Global Commons debate, no doubt. Our most comprehensive report, the Global Resource Outlook, was released just last year. And from this IRP perspective, my comments will try to add to the Global Stewardship Index and to the broader Global Commons debate. First, we do believe that it is important to focus on drivers and pressures, which lead to the challenges we face, in particular for policy design measures. We have to distinguish between drivers of environmental change, meaning the natural resource use in the production and consumption, and the consequences of that use, visible in climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, or health implications. Land use change, for example, is a key driver of biodiversity loss, water stress, and climate change. Tackling, therefore, the driver of these environmental impacts will help policymakers to focus on the illness rather than on the symptoms. Understanding this will make this pathway forward easier to plan and also make it more effective. Second, the index conceptual work as it stands is well addressing some of the critical domestic and spillover indicators. But Guido mentioned in his conclusions the gap existing linked to materials. So let me try to quickly share with you some of the thoughts how IRP could contribute to the future valuable work development. IRP is already engaged in the work that SDSN and Yale have been developing, and we are very pleased with that. The work builds on similar methodologies to the IRP material and impact footprint analysis. Material footprint counts all resources that are mobilized across borders to produce the product, which are often left behind as waste in producing countries, and attributes them to the consuming country of the final product. We think there is an important potential for the use of this approach, but we are also very much aware of the limits of this methodology. The SDSN and Yale groups are thinking about how to index spillover of impacts, pointing to the most important areas for action in consuming countries, without comparing apples and oranges in material use. To point to crucial areas for action, we need to measure and then index the different types of environmental impacts which arise from different combinations of natural resource use. Material flows within and across borders have been measured for a while, but connecting this to a fair reflection on where the environmental impacts occur and related to which materials or consumption choices has been really difficult. Impact footprints start tackling that challenge. This metric considers the whole system of environmental pressures exerted by human activity, including direct pressures occurring within the geographical boundary where the activity occurs, and indirect or supply chain pressures outside, transboundary ones. In simplifying terms, this metric assesses the different materials, including in the material footprint, and the impacts related to each material, depending on the origin of extraction and processing, measured in different impact categories from climate to biodiversity. Still work in progress, but a very promising one, making it possible to measure impact of material consumption in more nuanced ways. It is this work that will be useful for the Stewardship Index. It will be crucial to support and fund this work in the future to enable the global transparency necessary to make sustainable consumption choices as a country, industry, or individual. This includes better data on resource extraction and processing impacts, as well as consumption. Lack of quality data and poor measurement globally is an important point the environmental community must reflect on. We are all aware that this is a very complex and demanding scientific exercise, but it is a very valuable and much needed. It enables us to signal to policymakers the true impact of nations' consumption, including on their imports. Our goal is to try to define sustainable levels of resource use to guide countries, a mission directly related to the index mission. Finally, the index aims to assess progress towards targets for keeping environmental impacts indicators within planetary boundaries. As mentioned, sustainable resource management is a critical bridge between economy and also between the consequences. Only by measuring performance in the drivers of environmental change, we incentivize a sustainable economic model. We need to exploit all potential options to meet our policy targets under the SDGs, Paris Agreement, and new upcoming CBD agreement. We have seen little sincere political will and real progress in cutting resource consumption to the level stated in SDG 12. We have seen little progress towards a development mode that allows lower income countries to leapfrogging the intense resource use industrialization moment. We need to see more clarity in governments and business commitments. It must be clear that we are talking about fundamentally reshaping the provision of societal well-being, currently based on mass production and consumption, as Jeremy noted in his opening remarks. To deliver on ambitions set and needed, only more efficient systems will not be enough. We need targets that help us understand performance and addressing our drivers, our impacts, and how close we are to the environmental limits, to planetary boundaries. IRP is clear. Future growth of economic development and well-being should be decoupled from natural resource use and environmental impacts. And when it comes to developed countries, absolute decoupling is a must. We must ask ourselves not only how can we reorganize ourselves to be more efficient, but also what is enough, what is sufficient. Designing the Global Common Stewardship Index to keep us inside planetary boundaries leads us in this direction. And we should be able to contribute to the difficult answers, and also when it comes to the natural resource use. To conclude, we know that current metrics of global development and economic growth are fundamentally misaligned with sustainable consumption and production, sending incentives to the market that drive mass production rather than efficient and fair servicing of human well-being needs. Connecting the impacts of these market signals to material and natural resource use and its environmental impacts is how I see our partnership in developing Stewardship Index to address and improve the global commons governance. Thank you again for invitation to the Tokyo Forum, in particular to Naoko. Impressive event, impressive participants, which will hopefully contribute also to setting the direction of the future Center of Global Commons. Work addressing the critical questions of our own existence. Thank you, and back to you, Jeremy.
Yanis, thank you so much. And of course, you've put in the next layer of challenge, right? Which is that we can't just treat the symptoms, as Guido, Dan, we all know. We've got to get to the underlying drivers, and it's it's policy action that shifts those underlying drivers. And it's not just the policy, but it's the, if you will, the overall framing of the basis of well-being and the basis of the way in which our economy operates that has to be transformed if we're going to actually take those underlying pressures and essentially reconfigure how we think about the basis upon which we build future prosperity and well-being. So fantastic challenge. Now we have in the superstar panel, I mean, it's quite the panel, right? And an incredible privilege to be the moderator of it. We have the chance next to turn to Pavan Sukhdev, the president of the Worldwide Fund for Nature International, WWF International, to talk about how he sees the way to use indicators and to drive the, if you will, the transformative narrative that Dan and Guido and Yanis have laid out so beautifully for us. I wish everybody could have half an hour, not 5 minutes. So I apologize because it's just such an embarrassment of riches that we have on this panel. But Pavan, over to you.
Thank you, Jeremy. And I promise not to take more than 5 minutes because I only have 4 points to make. But firstly, thank you to Naoko-san and to Tokyo University and the president for this great event, and indeed for launching your center, because Global Commons is the issue of our times. And your center is, in a sense, therefore, an idea whose time has come. And I wish you really all the best. We talk about the index, and the power of the index is at best in its narrative power, in the story that it communicates to people. The best indices do that really well. You've chosen well, and I think the way that I think of the index is that it's kind of like a spaceship that has to, in order to be effective and to carry out its scientific and persuasive work, it has to have docking stations. And I'm going to speak about 2 docking stations for your spaceship, if you like. One being the system of national accounts and the changes being suggested through the Inclusive Wealth Index. So in other words, how do you land your spaceship into the world of finance ministries where the adjusted performance of nations is being measured? And the second is the docking station of the Sustainable Development Goals, because in my opinion, they have become, if you like, the single most important policy entry point for this decade, no matter whether you're an NGO like us at WWF or whether you are an advocate or an academician or indeed a policymaker. They've become the language of policy, and that is an important aspect to consider. In terms of the narrative, firstly on the issue of natural capital, I think it's excellent that your index has brought in and built in the language of natural capital, and also excellent that it has brought in the world of planetary boundaries, climate, biodiversity, aerosols, and water and forests and so on. And I think those languages and those lexicons are actually out there, and it's really good that you have tried to integrate those lexicons into your index. So congratulations on that wisdom. In terms of the docking stations, how do we get the language of natural capital and the finance ministries and inclusive wealth? The idea that you can measure performance at the national level, not just in terms of production or value added in terms of the system of national accounts and its GDP indicator with all its achievements and its attendant problems, but that you can do so in terms of inclusive wealth, which is the average available natural, human, and produced capital in the country. I think it's an old idea from the days of Arrow, Dasgupta, and Mailer, and it's been well developed. And over the last few years, 2012, 14, and 18, we've seen very useful inclusive wealth reports being published by the UN University and the United Nations Environment Programme, of which I'm still privileged to be a Goodwill Ambassador. And Yanis and his team have been contributors in their wisdom towards these developments as well. So I think it's important for these, if you like, financial and numerical dimensions also to, in some way or the other, integrated into the thinking of the index. You tell a great story. You bring in both domestic as well as cross-border impact measures in terms of trade, in other words, aspects such as imported water shortage. But also you need to have a docking station in the world of finance ministries and national accountants. That's why I recommend to you this particular link with the Inclusive Wealth Reports. Today, the Inclusive Wealth Reports are only published annually. I wish they were published more often. And I think you people can probably provide some of that oomph to make that happen. My second point on docking station is to do with the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think here we have remarkable, I spent some time reading up your GCS your GCS index indicators and trying to compare them with the SDG indicators. And here's what I found. And just share some quick observations in the interest of time. If we look at freshwater withdrawal, which is, let's say, on the domestic side, the level measuring levels of water stress and so on. Conveniently, there are two indicators there, 6.4.1 and 6.4.2, which will help you to provide the docking station into the world of policy through the SDGs. 6.4.1 is about change in water use efficiency over time, and 6.4.2 indicator is about the level of water stress, in almost the same language as you use, freshwater withdrawal as a proportion of available freshwater resources. So we have an opportunity here to use SDG goal number 6. If we look at SDG goal number 15, again, conveniently, we have that opportunity. You measure permanent deforestation domestically, for instance, in terms of the 5-year average, and permanent deforestation is also reflected in different language in goal number 15.3.1, which is the proportion of land that is degraded over the total land area. So again, there is an opportunity of locking in there and collaborating. If we look at biodiversity, in other words, species diversity, as well as areas covered by ecosystems like forests, let's look at two of your indicators. One which has to do with the mean area that is not protected in terrestrial sites important to biodiversity. And thankfully, again, there is a connection there in target number 15.1.1, which is in the world of the SDGs, forest area as a proportion of total land area. And secondly, the mean area that is not protected in freshwater sites important to biodiversity, which is from the GCS index. There is a corresponding target 15.1.2 in terms of the proportion of important sites for terrestrial and freshwater biodiversity that are covered by protected areas. So if you like, it's it's one minus the other. It's the obverse of the other. So I think there are opportunities here for building your narrative of the global commons and the index that is the story behind that narrative into the world of policy through the SDGs. And by the way, I could go on, but there are also connections of that kind in terms of species diversity and the IUCN Red List and so on. So all in all, I'm delighted to see this development, and I believe that this idea coming from the Tokyo University and its Center for Global Commons could actually act as a driver of change. I think the theory of change needs to be crystallized, and I hope that you will see, as I do, that there are opportunities here to find docking stations for your spaceship, which will enable you to enhance and accelerate and give more power to your theory of change. Indices need to lead to changes in policies, and I think the whole challenge here is how do we create that transition? So I hope that you are successful, and in that sense, I hope that you are also able to defer our transition from the Holocene epoch, which has led to us living in comfort, to the Anthropocene, which is unfortunately not so. I sometimes see the COVID-19, which is actually the fourth of these virus pandemics that have taken place in the last 20 years, as, in a sense, the Holocene striking back. If you like, it's the last flailing effort of the Holocene to reestablish. The Holocene is a complex adaptive system, and like any complex adaptive system, it has negative and positive feedback loops. This is one of the negative feedback loops that we are observing. It's the system crying for help to stay where it is and not turn into the more dangerous Anthropocene. Please help it, and I'm sure you will. Thank you.
Havan, thank you so much. I think all of us have a sense of the system wrestling with the transition that we're in. Now, one of the key docking stations, if I can pick up on that metaphor, is into the investment world. And it's with great pleasure that I would like to ask Professor Jin-Young Shin, who's the president of the Korean Corporate Governance Service, to talk about how we can use instruments like the index to connect into the world of corporate and investment governance.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this prestigious forum discussing the crucial issues that we are facing. Everybody have heard about this current ESG, the environment, social, and governance, so-called ESG. And recently, the ESG has settled in the mainstream of business and investment community, especially the emphasis on ESG, particularly the emphasis on the environmental ones becoming increasingly important in the managerial and also the investment decisions. This trend is mainly driven by so-called universal investors. So universal investors are large institutional investors with globally diversified and long-term portfolio. And their portfolio is, by nature, is inevitably exposed to the widespread cost of environmental damages caused by the business activities. So that means any externalities, particularly environmental damages from business activities, are wholly internalized in their investment returns. So current focus on ESG, especially the environmental issues by universal investor, is an effort to positively influence the way that business is conducted and consequently enhance their long-term investment returns. The universal investors include the major sovereign wealth funds like oil fund in Norway, or the public pensions and endowment like GPIF in Japan with more than $1 trillion invested, and the multinational asset management companies like BlackRock or Fidelity's. And their effort to incentivize the companies to act on environmental issues will not only improve financial well-being of beneficiaries, but also to generate the positive externalities of their environment. So the Global Commons Stewarding Index will be very useful for these the universal investors, in that as they make strategic asset allocation across countries, this index will help them understand how much each country contributes to global environment, and it will enable them to figure out the environmental impact on their portfolios. Especially, this index specifically measures the spillover effect across countries. And considering the current state of globalization and globally well-diversified portfolios of these universal investors, it clearly shows interconnectedness of environmental impact of each country. So that means that will help the universal investors adjust their portfolio explicitly, taking into account the overall environmental impact. So current version of the index has only some scores and also the ratings. And as already also mentioned, there are some areas for improvement. And I guess that will help for the universal investors use that index for more specifically in their portfolio adjustment. And also currently it covers only the 50 countries, but universal investors invest not only in the developed countries, but also emerging markets. So as it covers more countries in an index, that will help universal investors to make more effective decision makings in their investment. That's for my discussion. Thank you.
Great. Well, look, thank you so much. And I think, Guido, you can already hear that you know, there's an opportunity for this index, not only to inform countries, but also to play into one of those critical levers for change, which is the, if you will, the universal kind of investment community, because getting their capital to play in a different way will be so critical. Let me turn finally, last but by no means least, to Professor Yukari Takamura, who works at the Institute for Future Initiatives at the University of Tokyo, and just to help us round this off with the kind of triggers that you see as being most critical to enable the system change that we desperately need to see.
Thank you, Jeremy. A great pleasure to be panelist with such an excellent, the expert and scholars. First of all, congratulations for the Global Commons Stewardship GSI Index. I see quite a large potential for this the societal transformation to be preserved, restore the global commons through this index. I think that the very important point for the triggering the system change is the science and policy and the finance. I think the finance is already dealt with by two, the previous speakers, but I focus rather than the science policy. Of course, the science-based policy for societal transformation is critical, especially when we talk about drastic change and transformation. So to start with, how to create common understanding about the current situation and challenge a future society we want. I mean, the resilient, the decarbonized, the inclusive society. I think this index could provide a good tool for the discovering the challenges also the creating common understanding on these challenges. For instance, this index actually evaluate the transboundary impact and the spillovers. It's quite a feature. I think I see through this index the outcome. Some countries, the score, domestic score are not so good, but which is mainly due to export to other countries. That shows that clearly that we need international trade at the stake and the export and import. Definitely, we need international policy coordination on this point. Not only international coordination, but also some action in each part of the importing country and the exporting country. For instance, the change consumption pattern and the consumers' behaviors. Or for the exporting countries, how to change production pattern and process, even industrial structure. So that I think this index, especially reflecting the transboundary impact of spillovers, they create more or additional value to discovering such challenges. The last point that I like to say, I say that the finance is key. I very briefly because it was already mentioned by the two previous speakers. But to make a societal transformation, we need definitely to scale up financial flows, investment for such transformation. So I just suggest that this index maybe provide us some, information for investor to evaluate national risk profile for the ESG investing. Last point that I'd like to say that I really look forward to future evaluation of this index. I just one question, then or expectation, how to reflect the interlinkage between index and also preserve the global common society. Social aspect and governance aspect are also important. How these concerned aspects could be reflected in the future, this index. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think we've achieved the almost impossible of having a panel that has so much richness and content and ideas to somehow deliver on the messages within a very, very tight time frame. Let me just wrap up first by thanking everybody on the panel. What an incredible conversation. Second, by thanking the University of Tokyo and the Center for Global Commons, because of course, I think, Pavan, you put it so beautifully. This is an idea, both the center and the index, an idea whose moment has come, right? That's the moment we're at. And so for me, what I took from this is, of course, that this index, and it is an instrument, a means to an end, right, is about enabling us to deliver on the SDGs, on the Sustainable Development Goals. That is the broadest frame, because it does capture what we're trying to do in terms of the planet and people and peace, right? The spiritual component. It has to, of course, and Yanis, you reminded us of this drive to a true economic and socio-economic transformation, right? It's not just about improving what we're currently doing. It's about driving a deep economic transformation. We only get there, Dan, as you told us, through measurement, accountability, and real leadership that comes through that comparative with your institutional work. And this all happens if we use the data and we use the insights to drive a movement for action. So I'd like to thank everybody so much, and I wish all of you a very good rest of the summit and a rest of the day. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Jeremy, thank you very much. It was my first time to really learn about the Global Commons Stewardship Index, and I can feel from all the comments that was given by the panelists that it has so much potential to provide us with very rich information about how we're doing with natural capital, the impact of our material consumption, and track the trends, who are the leaders and laggers. There will be so much global transparency on how we are doing on sustainability. Naoko-san, you are part of the project team, and I wonder how you're feeling now yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Kuniya-san. Exactly. I was a part of the team. So actually, while listening to this presentation, my heart was pounding.
Was it really?
Yeah. Is this baby kind of born safely and well received? And thank you to the team. Well done. So that I felt that the kind of now totally relieved, but I also hear a lot of good questions, a lot of good opportunities to how to improve, how to brush up, and also a lot of docking stations. So we see so many opportunities for further collaboration. And I also see that a lot of good comments, questions coming from the audience. As promised, that we will respond to those questions as soon as possible. Maybe one or two takeaway that this is actually one of the product which the Center for Global Commons plan to produce. The index is important to guide the country performance, country policy decision, but it will be also combined and complemented by other part of the project, that the scenario exercise, the modeling, and the global commons in practice, and then the global commons framing. So that I very much actually looking forward to producing this entire project, so that we can provide to the community, that the public, this effective instrument to implement our commitment to, let's say, how to do that sustainability, achieve the sustainability by 2050 within the planetary boundaries. The end goal will be, we want to create this community of joint responsibility, the collective responsibility to achieve the global commons in the Anthropocene.
So this index is going to be a part of a more vast vision for other measurements and indexes that you will be collaborating with.
That's definitely one part, listening to the panelists today. But the index is one guiding post to navigate and steer the individual decision, but it should be also linked to the scenario pathways, which Potsdam Institute could actually do together with us. Then it also needs to find a way to how to implement. And yesterday, Johan Rocks, the Paul Polman suggested that the business needs to find a way to move together. So this another instrument that the Global Commons in practice will be a part of this big project.
Okay. And with that, let's move on to our next session. state of our global environmental crisis stems from the fact that our social and economic systems creates a huge environmental burden on the planet. Every day, we use natural resources from the planet, and we are emitting, including greenhouse gases and other waste, in massive amounts. Day one, the panelists said that we need systemic change to change and restore our planet. Naoko-san, I think the concept of systemic change is still very new and very unfamiliar. Perhaps you can tell us what we are saying about systemic change. What is it?
Exactly. Big question.
Yeah, sorry, make it short.
Yeah, no, we were in the Anthropocene where two systems are in collision. Our economic system, because we are dominating forces on the planet, and the natural system or the earth system, these two are kind of, coming, fighting with each other. And unfortunately, our economic system is really putting the pressure of the carrying capacity of the earth system. That's why we have changed the function of the earth system.
Right.
And if we want to keep this earth system as a stable and resilient, it's really our turn to change our way. That's what we mean by a system transformation. So it's not only just the GHG or the greenhouse gas emission. We have to change this entire economic system, that the way we produce and consume, the way we eat and move around and power up. So this entire system needs to be changed. That's what we mean by a system change. Interestingly, yesterday there are several business leaders mentioned that we really need to find the effective way to get out of this and the system stalemate. I think that Paul Polman said, even if he himself is committed for his company to move around, that we need either the collaboration along the value chain, or actually the collaboration within the sector with competitors. And for him, that the committed leaders to do it, we need also the collaboration with policymakers. And that's what we mean by system transformation, collaboration for system transformation.
And what would you say the most necessary areas that need systemic change?
Yeah, the people focus mostly on the energy sector, but to me, that the other sectors are equally important, and particularly that the food sector is critical, because that is the major threat to the planetary system, and actually, but at the same time, it has a huge potential to transform, because what we eat is our day-to-day decision.
Right. So let's look forward to hearing some concrete pathways that we can see and we should aim for in the next session. The moderator for this would be Andrew Steer, who is the president and CEO of the World Resource Institute. Let me give the floor to Andrew.
Andrew, you need to unmute.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's try that instead. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Good. Well, welcome everybody. Good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world, to session 3 of this extremely exciting conference, the Tokyo Forum. And congratulations to you, Professor Naoko Ishii, for all you're doing in creating the Center for Global Commons. How exciting to hear all about that in previous sessions. And congratulations both to the Japanese side and the Korean side for really remarkable content and ideas in this conference. And as Naoko was just saying, this session is about, okay, so what do we actually do in practice? The exam question is pretty clear at one level. So over the last 100 years, the size of the world economy has grown 20 times. It's 20 times bigger than it was before. That's a huge increase in the human footprint. And if we keep growing at, say, 3% a year, and I'm sure you're all good mathematicians, if you grow for 100 years at 3%, you'll grow by another 20 times. So by the end of this century, we could be 400 times bigger as a human footprint, a human economic footprint on the ecosystem as we were, for example, in the year 1900. Now, that is an amazing increase. It is a great blessing. It has reduced poverty more than ever before in human history. It has increased our longevity, so we're living 20 to 30 years longer than we were in 1900. So it's an amazingly wonderful thing, human ingenuity, human invention. So well done, everybody. The problem is that it has caused a degree of environmental stress that is now totally critical. And we've heard all about that in previous sessions. And as Naoko Ishii was just saying, what this actually requires now is not incremental change. It'd be nice to sort of change a bit here and a bit there. Unfortunately, it's too late for that. We actually need entire systems to change. So we need a new energy system. We need a new way of doing manufacturing, no longer sort of linear take, make, waste, but a more circular system. We need to build our cities quite differently to what we did. We need to consume differently. And we need a food and rural and agricultural system that's really quite different from what we've had before. And so in this session, we've got a group of stunningly well-qualified panelists, and they're going to help address this issue. And we're going to focus primarily on food and agriculture, but not exclusively. We'll also talk about a few other issues. So let me introduce the panelists to you. And I'm going to ask, when I introduce them, I'm going to ask them to give a one-sentence answer to the following question. So how big a change do we need in the system? That's the question. So just one sentence so that you get to hear their voices, and then I'll ask them more detailed questions and they'll have a chance. So first, Sunny Varghese, who is the founder and a head of Olam International, which is one of the largest commodity producers and manufacturers, agricultural commodities in the world. 5 million farmers are working for Olam. So he's sometimes referred to as the biggest farmer in the world. He's also chair of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Sunny, it's a great honor to have you here. How big a change do we need? You're also muted.
Sorry. Thank you, Andrew. In one word, we need a true metamorphosis, which means a fundamental change of the entire system. And the food and agri system is a complex system. But we need to get all the connected pieces to fundamentally metamorphosize to really achieve what we are looking for.
Brilliant. So in a minute, I'm going to ask you what you mean by that and how we actually do it. Dr. Agnes Kalibata is the Secretary General of the United Nations, a special envoy to prepare the high-level summit on food in the coming year. She also is head of what's called AGRA, which is about the green revolution in Africa. She's been a minister of agriculture herself in Rwanda. What's your answer, Agnes?
Can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Yeah, very good. So to go to Sunny's point, our system, our food system right now costs our world, based on Follows analysis, a total of $12 trillion and contributes in value $10 trillion. So if we think about what we need to do right there is to first of all remove the cost and take back our environment on a normal trajectory. So $12 trillion of doing the right thing.
Well done. Thank you so much, Agnes. Professor Shengen Fang is a professor at the College of Economics and Management at China Agricultural University, and he was until recently head of the International Food Policy Research Institute, which is part of the CGIAR system and one of the leading agricultural economists in the world. Shengen.
We need a massive transformation. That's because our food system have already created so-called very large externalities on our environment, on our climate, on our soil, on our water. So if we don't do something, we will experience a tipping point where we will not be able to go back. So we needed to work together, not just the private sector, not just the researchers, not just government officials, not just citizens. It's everybody working together.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Shengen, for that. And next, let me introduce Professor Hirayaki Hiroyuma, who is a professor at the University of Tokyo in public administration and done some really remarkable work looking at international public administration on environmental issues. Professor Hiroyuma, one sentence from you. How big a change?
Yeah, what we need is the kind of the long-term co-evolution of the multiple sector with multiple interaction between global, local, and the national level. So it's not just the issue of the one sector, energy, agriculture. The sector have to be interconnected, and also there have to be interaction, bottom-up and top-up. Those kind of the transformation is needed. That seems to be a very important point.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Professor. And finally, Dr. Tae-Young Jung from Korea. He is the director of the Research Center on Global Sustainability at Yonsei University. He's been a senior official in the Asian Development Bank and the World Development Bank, and he's worked at the Global Green Growth Institute. What's your one-sentence answer, Professor? I think you're muted too. Could you unmute, Tae-Young? We can't hear you. I wonder whether the organizers could.
They are working on it.
Oh, now we can hear you.
Okay.
Now we can hear you.
Thank you, Andrew. First of all, thank you, Tokyo University and the Chair Institute for Advanced Study. It's my honor and pleasure to join this interesting panel. Well, to answer your question, I think I have to echo the other panel's answer. Very destructive and transformative changes in all human systems, not just one sector or area. I think we have to do in every single sector of a human system.
Well done. Well, look, that was very interesting, actually. One thing, we are unanimous. Something big needs to happen here. So we've got our work to do for the next 45 minutes because we have to sort of talk about what that is and how we would get there. Let's start with you, Sunny Verghese. You said we needed a massive metamorphosis. What would the food and agricultural system look like if we managed to do that? How different would it be? I think we're all forgetting to unmute, by the way.
I'm so sorry.
We've been on Zoom calls so many times now.
And yet, yes, I'm so sorry. My apologies. I think the very definition of metamorphosis, the good analog is a caterpillar metamorphosizing into a butterfly. We can't say that butterfly is a stronger, bigger, better caterpillar. It is a completely new form and being. And therefore, based on all that the other panelists have just said and what Andrew also mentioned at the beginning, there has to be a systems transformation of all the interrelated parts and the whole of the food and agricultural value chain. So the first is how do we get to more carbon positive and climate positive and nature positive agriculture and farming, which would include how do we reduce the carbon intensity in the food, feed, and fiber that we produce, or preserve biodiversity and nature in the food, feed, and fiber we produce, because we account for roughly 25% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions and account for roughly 75% of the world's biodiversity loss. So how do you do that differently? Secondly, because this is a session on global common stewardship in practice, I want to get a little bit granular in terms of taking the agri supply chain and saying the first priority for us in that supply chain is how do we get a transition to more healthier diets, which can be produced sustainably. The third is how do you improve farmer living incomes? There are 500 million farming households, smallholder farming households, who produce 70% of our food. 55% of them are well below the poverty line of $1.90 a day. And another 35% is at that poverty line. And that is absolutely unsustainable. So how do we bring them to a living income? In the cocoa supply chains in Côte d'Ivoire, the household income per year is about $2,000, which is well below that $1.90. The fair living income or wage is actually $7,100. So how do you get farmers to a living income? That's the third piece. The fourth piece for me is about child labor free. About 2/3 of the world's child labor, 270 million children employed in agriculture, employed as child labor in the world. 2/3 of that is in agriculture. How do you make child labor free supply chains in agriculture possible? And finally, how do we make deforestation free, which is part of climate positive and nature positive? And as we go down this panel, I'm happy to give very specific examples in each of those 4 areas. That is the kind of food system which, for me, would be truly sustainable.
That is fantastic. Thank you. We're going to come back to you soon and get some more details. But I think this image of a butterfly is not simply an improved caterpillar. It's absolutely a wonderful, wonderful image. Let's go to Agnes. As the United Nations Special Envoy, moving towards the very important Food Summit in 2021, what are we learning about the food system we need and how we get there? I think you're still muted, Agnes.
Oh, sorry. So one of the things I'd like to say is we already knew a lot even before we went into the Food System Summit conversations, whether it's climate change and how it is impacting our world, whether it's the persistence of poverty in some of these places, or whether it is just things like COVID now becoming part of the new norm of our world. So there's a lot there that begins to define our world. What we've learned, though, is very interesting. Personally, one of the things I've learned is there's just so much consensus. As you've said here earlier, Andrew, there's so much consensus around the fact that we need to change, and that's really a good thing, and we need to take advantage of that. There's also a lot of consensus, as Sunny was saying, many of the solutions are already known. It's not that we don't know what we need to do. Many of the solutions are already known and they're sitting within our midst. Some of us are already implementing them. So one of the things we are doing from a Food System Summit perspective is we've put these action tracks in place to help dig out, engage with everybody, and bring some of these solutions. And let's look at them from a scale perspective. Because like you said, Andrew, we are out of time. We need to be doing things at scale. So which of these solutions that we know out there, Sun is reaching 50 million farmers. We still have millions of farmers out there that would like to be reached. But that's huge because it's 1/10 of the farmers out there that need to be reached. How do we reach the remaining 90% of the farmers? So the solutions are there. The beauty is this summit does provide an opportunity that when we do agree, then these things actually get done by all of us globally. It provides a platform that gets solutions out there so fast. So for me, there's a lot that we are learning, and I just leave it at that, and we'll come back later.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Agnes. And we're going to come back, and I want to ask you in a minute what you're really dreaming of in terms of an outcome of this incredibly important summit. Schengen, as one of the great academics in the field of agriculture, we now know what to do. Is that right? And how do we then do it?
Yes, well, as everybody agreed that we need a transformation in our food system. But we needed to do 3 transformations under that. The number one is technology, transformation in technology. So the newer technologies or innovation must have multiple wins, not just a win in yield as we did before, but also win in nutrition. We must improve nutrition, whether through fortification, biofortification, or through the diversification of food production. So the technology must have that win in nutrition. Another win is win in sustainability, to save water, save land, and build a resilience against climate shocks. So the second is a policy transformation. Again, the subsidies in producing more grains in OECD countries and emerging economies like China, India are not acceptable. these subsidies do not produce healthy, nutritious foods. They are not sustainable, and they emit too much carbon. So can we transform the policy to repurpose the subsidies to make sure that the support will help to produce more nutritious, healthy, and sustainable foods? We can do that. Instead of subsidies, we provide support for that. Infrastructure, R&D, value chain development. And number three is the behavior. Yes, we like what we usually prefer, our old habit. But in the future, we must make sure that what we consume, yes, it's not going to be good for our health, but also very friendly to our environment. I think this must be remembered by everybody. The behavior change is very critical. So three: transformation, technology, policy, and behavior.
Well, that's a terrific framing. Thank you. Thanks so much, Shengen. Let's go to Professor Hiroyuma. You work both at domestic level, public administration, but you also look internationally. What do we need to do internationally here?
Yeah, at the initial question, we identified the kind of the big needs to have the systemic change of the co-evolution in responding to the multiple sectors. So responding to that, one of the very important role of the international institution is a kind of a function of a catalyst or the coordinator of the co-evolution of the multiple actors or multiple sectors. It's not a kind of a traditional top-down type of the leaders. And a very important instrument for international institution is the function of the assessment. In the previous session, we discussed about the potential role of the index, assessment of the situation and the attribution of the, the effect. Those kind of assessment is important, and also assessment can work also for the assessment of tools. In the case of tobacco treaty, for example, the assessment of the tax instrument is actually one of the very important functions. So the international institutions have to be a kind of ensemble of the various actors having multiple function partnership. Actually, this itself is not a new thing. We had a historical, interesting example when Andrew introduced Shengen. You mentioned about the example of the CGIAR, the consultative group on the international agriculture research, which was established early 1970. It was a time when the amount of the quantity of the food is a very important issue. But even at that time, the CGIAR is the kind of the partnership between the World Bank and the FAO and the UNDP and others, and also involving the many research centers. So now what's required is the more wider issue have to be dealt with. It's not just the issue of the quantity of the food. The more the quality is the very important issue. The nutrition, and because of that, obesity becomes the issue also. And in addition to the human impact, the animal welfare is beginning to be a very important issue. And also the externality have begun to be discussed. The AMR, antimicrobial resistance issue, was taken up in that context. And the issue we are now discussing, externality to the environment, the climate or the biodiversity, this is somehow the extension of that. So item by item, those are dealt with under the existing regime incrementally. But what we need is we have to deal with in an integrated way or a simultaneous way. So for that purpose, more wider actors have to be involved. In addition to the FAO and the World Bank, now the UNEP and the WHO have to be involved. And also the subsidy issue was mentioned in that context. WTO is also the very important actors. And what's more important might be the different level of the actor is very important. Now the businesses and the supply chain and the non-governmental organization, those are playing a very important role, partly because of the very important role played by the consumers. So how to make the kind of the complementary platform for those actors, that seems to be a very important function for the international institution.
Thank you very much. I'd love to come back in a minute and ask you all, is the world now sort of ready for some major new thinking, major new institutions? You mentioned CJR. There was an era when the world's governments, the world's citizens are willing to come together and say, look, there's something big we need to do. We've sort of lost some of that, so I'd love to come back and see CQ. But first, let's go to Professor Jung. I wonder, Professor, whether you would try and unpack a little bit. You've been in this space a long time. When we say system change, could you just sort of unpack that a little bit? What do we mean when we say that?
Well, the system change means, well, in my opinion, basically we are out of our current practice, basically out of box. We are too much used to the current practice and system, and we just take it for granted. Our system is okay. So, for example, climate change issues, which is a kind of global public good. So it's none of my business. It's the government issue because it's a public good. It's international issue, so international organizations and UN agencies and UNFCCC, they handle it. And this is our current practice. And when you say the system change, then we have to change this kind of our practice. And especially in our decision-making process, if you see our practice, it's basically sectoral-based. Okay, it's an energy issue, then energy ministry and energy-related NGOs, energy-related professors, they are the ones who deal with this issue. But I think, the second the item that we have to think of for the system change, wait a minute, no, I think with that approach, we cannot solve the problem. So we know that, and we have to try the different method. The different method is like a holistic one, and everybody knows that the SDG framework and the nexus in water, food, energy, we all know that, it's well known. But is it the one that we are really practicing it? Not really, because we are not familiar with this holistic approach. My final point for the system change, one important item is if you look back, what we have done for last 100 years something, our decision-making process is basically supply-driven. Policymakers, they define the problems and, okay, this is the solution. So other stakeholders, you follow me, okay? If I want to deal with the climate change issue, I'm going to impose a carbon tax. I'm going to impose energy tax or emission trading. But it's very much a top-down, supply-driven system and process. But when you say the system change, why don't you try the different thing? Because we all know that this supply-driven system doesn't work. What's the alternative then? That is the demand-driven system. Why don't you listen to the demanders' need? I think Sonny mentioned, 5 million farmers, the quality, their incomes, and our system is ready to listen to our demanders' need. So for me, system change implies let's change our decision-making process from top-down, supply-driven to demand-driven, bottom-up. That's my interpretation.
Thank you so much, Tae-Young. Really, really helpful. We had hoped to have another panelist, Gunhild Stordalen, who were going to focus on the demand side, as you say. She created the EAT Foundation, and they look at shifting diets, they look at food loss and waste. Unfortunately, today she became unwell and wasn't able to join us. But if any of you want to talk about the demand side, but I love your point, Tae-Young, about we see this problem as sort of someone else's problem. We don't own it enough ourselves. And coming back to Sunny, I was thinking about your image of the butterfly. Recently, I saw this great cartoon of two caterpillars, sitting on a twig, on a branch, and having a nice chat. And this beautiful butterfly flew past them. And one of them said to the other, "My goodness, you'll never get me going up on one of those things." In other words, not even knowing what they were going to become and what they could become. And in a way that we've got to get through that sort of psychological change. Sunny, we're now going to sort of mix it up a little bit, but I want to turn to Sunny first. I was so struck, Sunny, in your discussion of what was needed, how central people were, how central the poor were. You've done amazing things. You have operations in 67 countries, and your starting point seems to be, how do we worry about those who are, whether they're cocoa farmers or whether they're palm oil or whatever? Interesting that people are so central. You don't need to talk about that, but I do want to hear from you as you sort of sit astride this sort of huge network, and you want to be part of this amazing transformation. How do you go about it? What does it mean on a Monday morning?
Yeah, just before I get to that specific response, Andrew, I want to just pick up on what you alluded to in terms of the metaphor of the two caterpillars and connect with what Professor Schengen had said about behavior change. Because in businesses, when we try and transform our businesses in the private sector, we look for three critical tests to see if a system is transformed. First, there has to be a discontinuous shift in financial performance. Second, there has to be a discrete, discontinuous shift in operating benchmarks. But the third and the most important thing is the place has to smell and feel different. So those two poor caterpillars that you were referring to who didn't want to be up there, that is the fundamental crux of whether a system is transformed. And you need to achieve all these three transformations concurrently. If you achieve one or two at a time, you haven't really done any systems transformation. So coming back to your question on how do we get things on the ground done, and Agnes's point was very valid, because I think we all understand why we need food system transformation. We all understand what do we need to achieve in terms of food system transformation. We also know what are the granular pathways that will get us there. But there's a whole big action gap between knowing why we need to do this, what needs to be done, how it can be accomplished. We have a massive action gap. So how do we, for example, try and lift farmer incomes from $2,000 per farming household of an average of 6 people to the household in Côte d'Ivoire to $7,100? So the first thing that we did was we gave out about 5.3 million improved cocoa seedlings to those farmers. That's one. Second, we developed 95,000 tailored farm development programs for individual farmers. We trained 180,000 farmers on regenerative agricultural practices in terms of soil health and getting more out of less and putting more back into the environment than they're taking out. We conducted training programs in 9 schools, which we started last year. 1,800 children participated in the training programs to teach them about conservation, to teach them about the risks of deforestation. We introduced a tool called Forest Loss Risk Index, which tries 80% of Ivorian cocoa farms have disappeared in the last, since 1960. And we are able to now say that which are the hotspots in the cocoa cultivation locations or the coffee cultivation locations where there's a very high risk of deforestation because people are moving into the forest reserves or the national parks, etc., because they got lower incomes. We have built 41 schools. We have built 1,700 classrooms. So there has to be very practical, granular actions if you want to bridge this massive action gap between the why, what, and the how.
Wow, that is amazing. And do you feel? I mean, obviously for Olam, you are you're pushing things forward. But if you had to look across the piece overall, and let's say number 10 is we're on track to have the revolution we need, and 0 is we're absolutely going nowhere. Where are we as a world, as a whole, on that spectrum as of today?
Yeah, I think we would be at a 3 or a 4, but the 3 or a 4 is from the one we were about 2-3 years ago. So there is fundamentally an inflection point and a movement, but we are a long way away from where we need to be. But this year, for example, I've seen at least 3 or 4 pre-competitive, whole of value chain approach for food system transformation coming together. So that's a good sign.
That's really interesting. So Agnes, if we were at a 3 or a 4, well, first, do you agree with that? In terms of getting on the path that's right for food and agriculture, where do you hope to be after the Food Summit next year? And what outcomes would you hope to see from the World Food Summit? And you might just say a word about what it is, because not necessarily everyone online knows what the Food Summit is.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. So 3 things really. I want to first of all recognize what you and Sunny are saying around people. This is about people. That's the Secretary General has called for this being a People's Summit. So my assignment number 1 is to build and raise public discourse around this summit, and like I said earlier on, starting with consensus, ensure that we take this conversation to every household, to every country, and make sure that people are engaged, because we are agreeing here, but we need to make sure that everybody else agrees again, so that we can get the level of commitment we need for the transformation we must have. So that commitment is important. So I'm looking for commitment number 1. Because it's only once we get that commitment that we can get action at scale. So the second thing I'm looking for is ambitious action. Now, at different places of the food system, we will need action and ambitious action. And to be able to do that, we must be able to, again, engage people from all over the world. Schengen Fen was talking about innovation. There's so many innovations out there, and we need to be able to bring them on board. That's the only way we're able to be able to deal with the question of not coming through on SDGs, innovations and ambitions that allow us to come out of our comfort zone. The last point is about bridging the massive gap of action that Sun is talking about. We need to commit to financing, we need to commit to investments, but most of all, we need to commit to change of behavior. The reason we are where we are today, it's the type of behavior we've adopted and developed over so many years, but we've run out of time for this type of behavior, whether it's how we use our environment, whether it's how we think about other people, whether it's how we use food, whether it's how we impact our environment. So much needs to change, and it's individual decisions that are going to help us change this, as much as it's also the collective that we get to do at our community level. So yes, I agree with Sunny that we are actually at 3, so we have a huge amount of work ahead of us.
Okay, and by this time next year, we're going to be at 6. Or are we? Let me turn to Professor Hiroyuma, because you sort of think about global politics and administration. Are we, is the world ready for the kinds of dramatic commitments that Agnes has been talking about, and what should we all be doing to encourage that?
I think that as everyone talked, that still at the stage of the 3 or 4 or something like that. But on the other hand, there seems to be a very interesting niche movement, a kind of the initiative for change happening in various parts of the world. So how to connect that seems to be a very important challenge. As Teo mentioned in his the speech that the changing the organizational structure from the supply-driven to demand-driven is very important. So in that respect, for example, in the area of the renewable energy, renewable 100 seems to be a very important movement. The demand side of the energy is pushing for the producers of the energy to provide the kind of the renewable energy. So that kind of the bottom-up kind of the initiative for change is existing. And also that might be true for the circular economy too, for the plastic, new type of plastic and so on. So how to make sure that kind of the bottom-up change it seems to be very important. So you mentioned a little bit in my previous intervention that what should be the kind of the institutional arrangement which is needed for dealing with this kind of issue. Sometimes when the environmental issue at the various level was discussed, there has been a repeated appeal for the global environmental organization or the comprehensive organization. But just organization is not the answer. You know, how to facilitate the kind of the bottom-up change and how to connect that seems to be a very important kind of institutional response to be held. That's what I'm thinking.
Thank you so much, Professor. Very helpful. Shengen, you're obviously sitting in China. China is the largest consumer of commodities, obviously, in the world, plays a very important role. It's going to be hosting the Biodiversity Convention this coming year. How do you see China's role in this transition, both domestically, but also in terms of its international commodity trade?
So firstly, domestically, the top leaders have made several important commitments. The number one is carbon neutrality by 2060, to reach the peak by 2030, by the way. So that's a big deal. I think Japan went out to achieve the carbon neutrality by 2050, European Union to 2050, so China 2060. I think it's a big deal for everybody to watch. And then China obviously is going to host the next year's biodiversity convention. Again, the top leader is very committed to make it a success and make sure that China is going to follow the good practice. Now, recently, the top leader, the President Xi Jinping, also committed to host a global conference on reducing food waste and loss. So, Andrew, we are the ambassadors, right, to do that. I think all these great commitments are there. But then the question is, what is the role of food and agriculture sector for achieving all these different goals? So as a researcher, we are really looking for data evidence to support that. Now, globally, China is importing more than 90 million metric tons of soybean, several million tons of meat. So for China, if China can, let's say, achieve carbon neutrality by 2060, a simple way is just to import more from other countries. But that's not going to do any good for the world, for the whole planet. I think China should also look at their global supply chain, global imports, to make sure that all the imports must be sustainable, must be carbon neutral. So there are several ways to do it. One is South-South cooperation. So the Chinese, let's say, technology transfer, infrastructure investment, must make sure that they work with the importing countries to ensure that the production there is sustainable, low carbon, and so on. And to make sure that the importing association do follow some sort of code of conduct. You know, if something is not produced sustainably, then these companies can stop importing them. So really, and then the consumers, finally, the Chinese consumers must be aware their behavior. So what they eat really matters to the global environment. So lots of things to do, enough excitement, but also enough work to do. So Agnes, I think we are really looking forward to your leadership, because COVID-19 is a wake-up call. COVID-19 sent 130 more acute hungry people, 150 more extreme poverty, poor poverty into extreme poverty. So there's no way to achieve SDG 1 and SDG 2 if we don't do something urgently. I think the next key milestone actually is a food system summit. And here China, I think China will be very happy to work with you to make that summit successful and meaningful.
Terrific, terrific. So Agnes, we're all going to be working for you in the coming months to see this.
Let us know how can we support you.
Yes, indeed. Tae-Young Jung, I wonder whether, you've worked for the World Bank, you've worked for the Asian Bank, you've worked for the Global Green Growth Institute, now you're a professor. You know that actually you need government policies and you need commitment from the private sector, you need citizen engagement, you need the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle to come together. Could you just say a word about that and what do we need to do together to make that happen?
Well, I think linking to our the system change issue, I have to pick up the word from Dr. Fan's initial remark. I think he highlighted the importance of the new technology. But the new practice that we have to do it is not just the technology development and application in agriculture sector for food issue. I think let's look at this, the digitalizations and ICT technology make us doing so many things. So why don't you apply such technology to merge the technology development and application in food, the system? That give us a lot more opportunity for our system changes, and that give us a lot more new ways to process. For example, many Asian countries during this COVID-19 period, one of the success factor for Asian countries is to apply this smart or digital technology application to trace the patient and so on. So this converging technology from other sector, that's going to be the new factor for our system change. Second, going back to this, the food related issue. Well, according to IPCC, a special report on renewable energy and the climate change in 2012, I don't remember exactly, but according to the scientists' findings, the bioenergy, the potentials are much, much bigger than the wind and solar that we are talking about nowadays. In year 2030 or 2050, I think 2 times, 3 times more than the other renewable potentials. What's the meaning of the bioenergy potentials? Well, it seems to me as an economist, it's basically land competition. If we allocate the land, and this land is for agricultural product, which is for our food. But wait a minute, that agricultural product is for our energy. Now this is a new situation. How are we going to solve this one from the agricultural sector angle only? No, I don't think so. Then we have to combine, we have to think what kind of maximum use of our energy, land for energy product and the agricultural product. So to solve such, I think we need a technology merge, which is very fundamental, essential factor for our system changes. I think because of time, I think let me cut myself. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you so much. Very helpful. We're heading to the end zone now. So unfortunately, we don't have time for a full round again. But I want just in closing to ask Sunny, and then since Agnes is going to be summoning us all to this summit, she can have the last word. And what I'd like you to do, Agnes, is to tell us what you want the several thousand people that are listening to us right now. What do you want them to know, and what do you want them to do? What do you want the different players to do as we lead up to the summit? Sunny, you have written and spoken so eloquently. And by the way, if anybody wants to be inspired about reform of the food system, go to YouTube or whatever and dial Sunny Verghese. You'll hear some great speeches. I mean, obviously, the problem is really a sort of what you call a wicked problem, isn't it? I mean, we have to increase food consumption by about 50%, but many of the traditional sources of food, agricultural growth, such as cutting down forests, are not going to be available to us. Water is going to be less plentiful. Currently, 1 billion people nearly go to bed hungry. 2 billion people go to bed too fat. There's a sort of dysfunctionality that is huge. Could you talk both as a leader of a major corporation, but also as you deal internationally, as you're the chair of the World Business Council, Sustainable, how do you bring these pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together? The governments need to act, companies need to act. We need people like Schengen to do research. We need all the pieces to come together, so to speak. What's the special sauce that you're looking for?
I think one of the points that Professor Schengen made about the 3 transformations, the second point that he made was about policy transformation. Most governments that we are in, where we operate, we see governments focusing on securing one benefit or one win. So it is either focused on transition in terms of dietary habits to a more sustainable dietary system, but they're not then focused on planetary health, that is climate positive or nature positive. They're not focused on social justice in terms of farmers improving their living incomes and their prosperity, for example. So I think we need a more integrated and coordinated way of seeking the potential for multiple wins and multiple benefits being achieved. And that is at the essence and nub of what we are referring to as systems transformation. So healthy diets, which will lead to planetary health, and then socially just, and also economic prosperity. How do we bring all this together in an integrated sense is the nub of any system transformation effort that we are seeking in the food sector.
That's terrific. Thank you so much. Agnes, by the way, Agnes, I know where everyone else is geographically. Sunny is now in Singapore. Chengen is in China. We have someone in Korea, Professor Tung. We have Professor Hiroyuma in Tokyo. I'm sitting in Washington, D.C. Where are you sitting?
How do you know where they are? Are you a magician or what? I'm in Nairobi.
Oh, you're in Nairobi. Okay. Well, I mean, isn't it amazing?
I'm in Nairobi.
Amazing what we can do, bring this incredible group together. So in just a couple of sentences, give us our marching orders.
Yes. And thank you all for the offer of support. And again, it's amazing to be part of this amazing panel. And thank you, Naoko, for really ensuring that we have this meeting happening now. So I really wanted to emphasize 3 points. We have food systems dialogues now going on. By the way, just a second for the audience that doesn't know what I'm talking about. This food system summit was called by the Secretary General because we are not coming through on the SDGs. As Schengen Fen was saying, in some cases, we are even walking backwards. We are not coming through. We are very far behind. And the SDGs are very critical for our environment. They are very critical for nutrition. They are very critical for ending hunger. And they are very critical for livelihoods and improving livelihoods. All the things that we care about in the Food System Summit. So we want you to engage. We have put in place dialogues across all countries. We have already written to countries. We have put a process in place so that countries can engage. If you don't want to engage because your minister is leading this and your government is leading this, there are also independent dialogues where we can have thematic engagements with farmers, with indigenous people, with private sector. So really make sure that your voice is heard. The second place to engage is action tracks. Action tracks are looking at, what are going to be those ideas, those game-changing ideas and innovations that are coming from our landscape that we can scale and take out there and start transitioning our food system. So being part of those and also making sure that if you have an idea, if you have a great idea, don't leave it on the side. Make sure it's out there. We have a scientific group that is looking at what we should be taking forward. Make it their job to make sure that they sift through all this and give us a direction forward. So I just wanted to make sure that you understand that these instruments are in place. They're online platforms. They are champions. Be a champion. Be a food hero. We have 690 food heroes from 96 countries. We already have 42 dialogues going on across 42 countries. So it's all picking up, and we'd like to make sure that you're part of what is going on. Just make sure your voice is heard. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everybody. This has been a terrific session. Just to let you know and to thank the University of Tokyo, to thank you, Professor Hiroyuma, because I know you oversee the part of the university, and Naoko, obviously, Naoko Ishii putting together the Center for the Global Commons. This is a very exciting initiative. And just to let you know that the World Resource Institute that I have the privilege of heading, together with the Global Commons Alliance, are working with the University of Tokyo on developing what we call a system change lab, if you like, a situation room that's going to look at these system changes in food and agriculture, in industry, in energy, and so on. We're going to monitor them, but then we're also going to learn from them, because some of them are going amazingly well. Some of the things that we've heard about today, very, very exciting. and there's a special source that we can learn from, and we can actually then look at other sectors and say, is there something to be learned? And then we're going to be sort of nudging them. So watch out for this space. So next year in the conference, I hope we'll be able to present, or long before that, we'll present our first analysis of sort of how goes the battle across all of these exciting revolutions. And I really want to thank all of you as sort of giant leaders in this space, Sunny and Schengen and Professor Shirayama and Professor Jung and Agnes. What a wonderful privilege it is to be with you. So with that, I'm afraid we have to wrap up. Thank you all very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For your information, on December 18, we will host the first food system dialogue in Beijing together with WI, Follow, and many others.
Brilliant.
Oh, that's
we
good. That's great.
Thank
you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Andrew, thank you very much. That was the Global Commons Stewardship in Practice with emphasis on the food system. And food is something that is so close to us, but we really never step back and look at what the problem is. I think this panel showed us how vast the problem is, the social issue, the environmental issue, and also our behavioral issue, all combined are there. And we have to be ambitious about acting. The chairman of the Food Summit next year, Agnes Kalibata, really emphasized taking action. And I think because food is so close to us, it is something each and one of us can think about and take action. With that, I'd like to move on to the panel 4, which is Global Cyber Commons. Digitalization is accelerating rapidly, and with that, massive amounts of data are being accumulated. Digitalization is expected to radically transform our world. And Naoka-san, we have been discussing global commons, but this session is cyber commons, and about taking stewardship of the cyber commons. So, why cyber commons?
Yeah, important question. I think we have to admit, or I have to admit, the so-called sustainability community, as I know it, has focused mostly on the real world, or geophysical world. But we belatedly came to understand this role of the data, role of digitalization is something very, very important if you are so serious to safeguard the global commons. With the advancement of the digital technology and the AI and everything, that all decisions, actions taken in the real world are now stored and in the cyber world. And sometimes, in many cases, they help us actually accelerate the safeguarding global commons. But sometimes, they also derail our effort to achieve the global commons, because currently, unfortunately, cyberspace is full of fake news, lack of trust, and they will do a lot of tricks. So how we can really ensure this cyber world can actually help us achieve the global commons. That's what we are aiming at under this session, how we could do this on cyber global commons.
Right. So the moderator for this session is once again Jeremy Oppenheim, who is the co-founder of Systemic. Jeremy, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, and what a privilege it is to moderate what I think is the last panel of the forum, and it's a fantastic opportunity to bring the world of the cyber commons together with the world of the global commons, and of course we know how deeply interconnected these two different forms of the commons will be over the decades to come. The global cyber commons describes, as I think you will all know, the widespread interconnected digital technology that is already radically transforming society, from how science is done to how humans collaborate, to which economic sectors thrive, to the way in which our food gets produced and consumed from the last session, to how and what kind of media is produced and consumed. We live, as much as we live in the Anthropocene, we live in an increasingly digital Anthropocene. And this is the world in which data and cyberspace and machine learning have, of course, enormous potential to support the stewardship of the biophysical commons. And those, of course, include biodiversity, atmosphere, land, oceans, and water. And yet, at the same time, we also have to recognize just the nature of the threats and risks that the cyber commons do pose for humanity. For example, will we have open data that supports the global commons, or will we use cyberspace to further enclose and privatize information? And for those of you that have a historical sense of how the physical commons have evolved over many centuries, and certainly in my country, in the United Kingdom, it was the privatization of the commons that, of course, led to, if you will, a loss of so much of the collective, public spaces that was so important to the way in which society functioned, in previous times. So there's a deep question as to how collective action across society can be digitally enabled, reinforcing not just the physical global commons, but our social interactions around those, or whether, in fact, digital inequalities will further widen social and economic divisions and lead to deep challenges to the stewardship of the global commons themselves. We have an absolutely fantastic panel to explore these issues. I'll introduce them one at a time as we walk through the session, but I'm going to start with Jamie Arbid, who's a close friend and collaborator. He's the co-founder of Rethink X, which is a think tank that explores large-scale technological disruption and its social and ethical implications. And I can't think of anyone better to kick off this panel. So, Jamie, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Jeremy. And generally, technological disruptions are very poorly understood. We tend to look at them through a very narrow, linear mindset, and we fail to appreciate the speed that disruption can happen at, and indeed the cascading impacts that can affect all aspects of society. So what we do at Rethink X is we look through a complex systems lens. We try and see the connection between sectors and understand the feedback loops that drive that S-curve that we see in technological disruptions. So when we look ahead, what we're seeing is extraordinary improvement in the cost and capability of key technologies, information technologies, biotechnologies, batteries, solar, sensors, and so on, that are going to converge in different ways and disrupt every sector of the economy, from food to healthcare to agriculture. And I just want to deal with a couple of sectors very briefly to give you an idea of what we're seeing. So first of all, electric power. We see a full disruption of our current electric power system by the early 2030s, disrupted by 100% solar, wind, and battery system. And that's largely driven by the cost trajectory that we see these technologies going on. Solar has dropped by 80% over the last decade, batteries by 90%, wind by about 45%. And we see similar, slightly lower cost reductions over the next decade, meaning by 2030, 100% solar, wind, and battery electric power system will be the lowest cost form of energy we can have. And when we build that system, what we get is a superabundance of energy. We have to overbuild capacity in order to provide electric power during the darkest day of the darkest month of the year. And that's a huge opportunity, because by building this system, the lowest cost system, we get what we call superpower. This is this superabundance of essentially zero-cost energy. At the moment, we curtail, but offers huge opportunity. And not only will that new system be fully decarbonized, but it will allow us to decarbonize other sectors of the economy. So that low-cost energy might be used for water desalination. It might be kinds of other parts of the economy as we see this electric power disruption play out. Food, likewise, we're seeing an extraordinary improvement in the cost of producing proteins through novel methods. Precision fermentation is one of the key technologies that's racing down a cost curve, and we expect again by the early 30s to be able to produce proteins at a fraction of the cost. We're essentially decoding food. We call it food as software. So information's at the heart of this. And by the 2030s, we expect animal agriculture to be largely replaced by a new system that's not only vastly lower cost, but also better on every other parameter. We'll have food security, we'll have local self-sufficiency, be better for our health, better for all aspects of our environment. And we expect this to move along an S-curve, because what happens is in a technological disruption is you get resistance to change that pushes down adoption in the early phases. But as the costs and capability improve, you get economies of scale, you get decreasing costs, you get consumers becoming increasingly comfortable, you get regulatory support and so on. And these feedback loops are what drive the shape of that S-curve. So the brakes suppress adoption in the early stages, and then the accelerators drive the adoption of the new and the breakdown of the old system. So we'll see animal agriculture becoming increasingly inefficient, meat increasingly expensive, and so on. But the impact of these disruptions is what's really interesting, because as we see technologies disrupted, as we see every sector of the economy disrupted, we'll see enormous implications, for instance, for our environmental issues, climate change, a decarbonized energy system, a decarbonized transport system, a decarbonized food system, driven largely by market forces, by economics, by products that are cheaper and better than the existing ones, will have huge implications for our greenhouse gas emissions trajectory. There's an enormous potential there that comes with the improvement in technology that we mustn't underestimate when we think about how to solve climate change. And not only that, we'll reduce the pressure on our ecosystems, on our oceans, on our forests, on our soils, as we replace the need to deforest, the need to over-farm our soils. And we'll see huge amounts of land freed up from industrial agriculture, which we'll be able to use for other purposes. So we need to be aware of what's coming and plan for it, so that that land and these opportunities aren't missed, that we use them for the optimal benefit of humanity. Thank you, Jeremy.
Jamie, thank you so much for kicking us off with a sense of the possibility and the inspiration. And for those of you that were on attending panel 2, where we were talking about the Stewardship Index, one of the key messages that came out of that conversation was that we don't just want to measure the system and its symptomatic outcomes as that system is organized today, but we need to actually enable and drive deep transformation and take, if you will, a focus on and make a focus on the drivers of what's causing, if you will, the loss of global commons. And I think, Jamie, your core proposition is that the technologies that are coming through, in principle, many of them digitally enabled in one form or another, will lead in principle to a fundamental reshaping of production and over time consumption systems, and that can actually take the pressure off the global commons. But of course, it always has to be nested into a broader framework to make sure that those technologies, as they come through, create broad social benefits and not greater inequalities. And I think that that's a topic, if we have 5 minutes at the end, I'd like to come back to, because one could imagine how unequally distributed these changes could be. I don't know if you want to make a 1-minute intervention on that point.
Yeah, certainly, Jeremy. I mean, you're right. So food, for instance, is a really interesting example. And you know, we can see two directions for the food system. You know, either we end up like pharmaceuticals, where we own the intellectual property that sits behind this system, where you know, those who develop novel proteins, you know, benefit hugely. Or we can have a system that resembles kind of open source software, where the IP is shared and consumers get the benefit of these very low costs. And that's a major challenge. I think, you know, pharmaceuticals is a very different industry where there are huge costs of development, and you need to fund that through an IP regime that allows companies and encourages companies to invest. Food's very different because, you know, we're seeing children in science projects at school developing new proteins, for instance. I mean, the costs are tumbling, and within a few years, there'll be no excuse for enabling an IP regime that allows companies to profit in that manner. So we very much support an open architecture that allows you know, the sharing of the intellectual property that is developed over time.
Fantastic. Well, we'll come back to this because I think this is, in a sense, the center is so for Global Commons is always looking at how the scientific and the kind of technical dimensions of change and interact, if you will, with the social and the governance requirements to make sure that change actually achieves the outcomes that we all want to see with respect to the Global Commons and our if you will, the evolution of a civilization that can engage with those commons properly. Let me now turn, if I might, to Dr. Yoon Kim, who is the Chief Technology Officer at SK Telecom, South Korea's largest wireless carrier and a leading company in 5G and AI. And of course, one of the other things we know is that the widespread sort of penetration of mobile technologies is one of these other vectors, if you will, to changing the world and to helping shift consciousness about topics like the Global Commons. So Dr. Kim, over to you.
Thank you, Jeremy, and it's a distinct honor to be a part of this amazing panel. I actually worked on the field of speech recognition for the past quarter century. Most recently, my gig was at Apple, where I led Siri speech recognition development. Mostly my work has been on how to resolve the communication last mile between humans and machines, these so-called agents. Siri, for instance, helps you get things done better with smartphones. And I'm really excited to see the entire area of artificial intelligence, machine learning technologies that we developed now not only help people communicate better with machines and smartphones, but they're now being used to solve the most profound, the biggest and most difficult problems in the world, including global cyber commons. And so this is truly an awesome opportunity to share some of my ideas and beliefs. The reason why I came to SK Telecom is to see whether there are any interesting intersections between AI that I've mostly worked on and these hyper-connected networks called 5G. So my role as CTO at SK Telecom is to see use cases, investigations, research and development on how hyper-connected networks can help people and societies. And I prepared a few slides to demonstrate and illustrate my ideas. If you can put them up, that would be great. They're TED-style talk slides, and so I'll have to explain them. So I am in the business of making sure we have great technologies to connect people with things, such as machines or sensors or robots, and make sure that they help not only to connect between machines, but also connect people to people, people to things, and society to society. And if you expand that idea, that is indeed the global commons and the global cyber commons. The potential of 5G and AI is immense, and we're just scratching the surface of trying to understand what benefits it can have. For instance, in smart farming, smart environments, smart factories, we're going to really see in the next decade how AI and 5G together can help people do things better, more accurately, more efficiently, safely, naturally, and conveniently. So there's many, many different promises that hyper-connected intelligence can bring. And just to give you an illustration, I think 5G, it can be coined as an AI superhighway, where in the past, the internet may have been the information superhighway where nodes of people and things can exchange information. Now I think 5G can be the conduit and the superhighway on which intelligence, AI, can communicate with other AI. And I'll delve into this point more in my third slide. So let's take the next slide. These are the benefits of 5G and AI, but there's a cost. And as Jeremy mentioned, if we're not careful, AI and 5G, and for that matter, any type of disruptive technology, we run the risk of these being the part of the problem and not a part of the solution. So I'll give you an example. Immense networks in South Korea, probably one of the most advanced 5G networks, requires a lot of data, a lot of compute, a lot of memory, and thus a lot of power. So carbon emissions is a critical issue for a lot of the 5G networks and equipments. Same goes true for mobile edge networks and for artificial intelligence models. I'll give you an example. 8 years ago, when my company got bought by Siri and Apple, AI models were really small. Speech recognition models were the size that are really, really small and compact. 8 years later in 2020, now I hear from certain research articles that the average size of artificial intelligence models is now 20 million times larger than 8 years ago. And you can imagine 20 million times larger size models will result in more compute, more data, more storage, more consumption of power that has to have a profound impact on sustainability. And it's a serious issue. And I don't really have a lot of time to delve into other issues and other risks that artificial intelligence poses. For instance, data bias risks, security risks, privacy risks, and other types of social dilemma type of risks. But just alone, the environmental impact alone, really, we have to make sure these risks are properly governed and properly managed and properly shared. And this forum is an excellent platform for us to talk about these issues. And I'll end my talk with the final slide. This is a sort of a unique slide, I guess. It contains my view on what AI can do. Now, we all know that artificial intelligence can help collect data. It can then analyze the data, really large amounts of data. It can also use intelligence to detect certain anomalies, certain problems, and it can also predict. And for vision and for speech, it does a pretty good job of inferring, detecting, recognizing objects, and recognizing speech and language to help people, again, make better decisions, be more efficient in terms of cost, and also provide new revenue opportunities. This diagram shows that in the future, certain individuals on the left-hand side will have access to these AI technologies, whether they're AI assistants or intelligent search engines or hyper-connected services. They all fall under the category of my definition of AI. There will be people that have access to hyper-connected intelligence. Then you'll have the upper right-hand corner, where because of a lot of different reasons, there will be societies and human beings without such access to artificial intelligence and technologies that help them do things better. This discrepancy and this gap need to be narrowed. And we need to work really hard. And I think Jeremy made an excellent point about open source, open data, open innovation. And I think this is a really critical issue. Now, in terms of enterprise AI or intelligence technologies for the public sectors, in terms of government bodies, organizations, corporations, I think it is a must-have for all of these organizations to have AI. And what I mean by that is there has to be intelligence to gather data and to be able to communicate with individuals who have access to the AI technology, such as the one on the left hand, probably in more developed, advanced countries. We also need to have AI to make sure we communicate with the rest of the world who do not have such access to technology. And AI can really be a good mediator because it not only has the ability to predict, analyze, and to infer, but through bots and through assistants, we can communicate with human beings. And there will come a time where AIs of certain individuals and societies communicate with AIs on the other society. And I think that's another concept of global cyber commons that we can look forward to. And I'll end and conclude my talk by saying there has to be many different things for this type of mediation of global cyber commons to work. One critical element is data. And I think Professor Kitsugawa will touch upon these topics of how important data is to global cyber commons. That's my talk for now, and I'll hand it over back to Jeremy. I think you're muted, Jeremy.
So I am. You would have thought I would have learnt after 9 months of Zoom calls and the rest of it. But look, thank you so much. And what an incredibly inspiring kind of presentation in terms of what is possible, right? And this whole notion of hyperconnectivity. And I love the way you were describing, you know, kind of in a sense, the way of connecting people to people and intelligence to things and bringing this all together in a way that leads to inferential intelligence, right, is what I took out of it. I also took out that there will be unequal access to that inferential intelligence, and how we think about that is an act upon that now, not 10 years from now when the genie is out of the bottle and you know, a few, if you will, internet or social media titans control all the economics and the data and the algorithms. But how we think about it now has to be one of the lessons of the last 10, 15 years. And I fear that not enough has been done. So I think the fact that the Global Commons Center is beginning to engage on this topic is such a wonderful sign of the way in which the university and the center is approaching the whole field. Let me turn, if I might, to Professor Kitsurogama and ask you to take us through to the next piece of this story in terms of the way in which data really can be used to inform and improve our management and our governance of the commons. So, Professor, over to you now.
Okay, thank you very much. I prepared my slides. So, would you please show up my slides? Okay, thank you. As you know, Professor Ishii-sensei is a kind of organizer of this whole entire symposium. She recognized that cyberspace is now extremely important for citizens. So then she's thinking about the kind of cyber commons. But to me, I heard her explanation, but still unclear. So that's my talk. It's just my personal interpretation and not authorized by her. So, and I believe the data is most important asset for the human being. Next slide, please. During pandemic time, actually this June, very serious problem called Lancet Gate happened. Maybe some of you might know about this. So effectiveness of the vaccine for malaria against COVID-19 was reported. But lots of questions came out, and eventually the authors declined to provide the evidential data and finally retracted their paper. So this problem clarifies the importance of the data. In addition, even under COVID-19 difficult period, correct data sharing is not easy, or actually is very difficult. So I believe the data should be regarded as a kind of cyber common so that many people can use it without any complicated restrictions. So next slide, please. I think COVID-19 related data was not common in those days, or a couple of 10 minutes left. And next slide, please. In 2013, under G8, Open Data Charter was discussed under Open Science Framework. Before this, Open Access Journal was a key issue, but the developing countries' people should be able to access academic papers. But in 2013, not just paper, but also the data used to derive the conclusion of the paper should also be open and be shared globally. Although the declaration does not mean real execution, you can see the left-hand side bar, Elsevier's data sharing policy in this year. Still mandatory is small, but many journals do recommendation for data sharing. And also data sharing journal is now becoming available. Next please. So I'd like to introduce some University of Tokyo activities on the data commons. NII, National Institute of Informatics, I'm currently serving as Director General of NII, working with the University of Tokyo and established a medical big data research center in 2017. So this slide shows us, next slide, this slide shows CRIS. Yes. So the center is NII Cloud, and the left-hand side is medical society provides the data to the cloud. And right-hand side, researchers do the analytics over the clouds. And next, please. You can see the SINET 5 name over there. My institute, NII, is providing a backbone network for entire Japan. Its speed is very fast, 100 and 400 gigabits. And because we are collecting the CT image, not X-ray image. So that's why gigantic, big amount of the imagery data has to be transferred from various kind of hospital, and this SINET 5 works really fine. Next slide, please. And based on that, we collected so many imageries. At this moment, radiology CT image around 0.2 billion. That's a huge amount of data. Next slide, please. And then we developed AI for the detection of the COVID-19 pneumonias. You can see some red areas. This is named areas, so it's a kind of disease areas, and built AI. Next slide, please. And one more. Next. We originally thought PCR could be a kind of a ground truth. However, you can see the lowest bars is N is the negatives, and the P is positives. So even in the negatives, you can see the upper dot. I mean, the lung is somehow has a big disease. You can see that. What this means is PCR result is not necessarily positive, but the CT, computed tomography, gives more precise information. So next, please. Because of this data commons, we can build a pneumonia image AI very quickly. Now I can say this is a kind of a domestic cyber commons, because the data is not necessarily easy for us to share the foreign countries, only used in our countries. But this is a kind of the commons, and Tokyo University is now doing that. Accuracy of AI is currently 85%. Next page. And let me introduce yet another one. Jeremy-san knows about our DS activities very well, so I'd like to shortening it. At the upper side is a kind of observation data. The lower side is a simulation data. It's a kind of digital twins. All the data is converged into the DIAS project in the middle side. And please next. This is a physical picture of our systems. The amount of the data is 50 petabytes. This system is large. I think the size of the data is in SK Telecom much bigger, but the 50 terabyte university is very big. Okay, so DIAS has a problem. Next slide, please. DS has a kind of provided the place for the experts and the citizens to collaborate and to solve the societal problems by not just storing the data, but also the sharing it with the society. So this can be, I think, could be said as cyber commons, a new form of the society that discuss the problem solving in the real world data. For example, next one, please. I can show the various example. This is Africa, how to protect malaria infections. Actually, we are doing the prediction of the when and where the malaria disease is happening. Next slide, please. This one is kind of South America's is Brazil situations. Agricultural drought monitoring and the prediction system. So local farming information collected from the ground and transfers the DS for the real-time data assimilation. This helps local farmers a lot. I have to skip, but you can see some rough image. The next one, please.
Professor, can I ask you to close off here because we're very short of time?
Okay. So I'd like to skip just one more minute, okay?
30 seconds.
Okay, next one. This is for the Myanmar for the flooding control. The third one, the fourth one, next one also, please. This one is Tokyo, actually, the flood control. This is interesting because the left-hand side is the intensity of the rain. The right-hand side is kind of fullness of the sowages. And this is a kind of real-time flood monitoring and the prediction system. Right now, this is almost really working well. And the next slide, please.
No, I think.
And the number of the participants is more than 6,000. And half of the people is global, I mean, not Japanese. So that's why I could say this is a kind of global commons. Please say last slides. So I explained the not commons and the domestic commons and global commons, all related with the data. I think data is one of the important cyber commons. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, and I apologize for trying to cut you short, but we have to give everyone a chance. And I think what you've heard is the biggest disruption story, the potential for hyperconnectivity, and then the incredible power of the data we've got. But all of this only makes sense if it's put in the right context, right?
Yes.
The technology has to be in service, and there's nobody better, I can imagine, to help us provide and to wrap up the panel and offer us that context than Sherino Salim, who's a dear friend and plays many, many roles, but one of them is the co-founder of United in Diversity, a foundation that works with Indonesian leaders, but frankly, leaders across the world, from business, government, and civil society in a multi-stakeholder coalition, to not just talk about, but to implement sustainable solutions to the region's biggest challenges. So, Cherie, the panel and the floor is yours.
Can you put up? Thank you. Can you put up my slides? And you have to tell me whether it's on because I have some problem seeing it. Sorry. Is it on? It's the happiness pyramid. Is it on?
Perfect. Yep, it's on.
Okay. So thank you very much, Jeremy, and our inspiring panelists, and also to many of you from traveling from all over the world. This slide is about happiness, and I think you might be wondering, we are talking about cyber commons. Why is this slide about happiness? I think all we are doing here is, less in Jeremy said, is in service of something. And if we can be in service of happiness for people from all corners, then there is good out of the technology and many other many other work that many of the partners here we are working towards. So this is the happiness pyramid. I think it has 3 levels at the bottom, and this is it's about harmony of people with other people, and at the middle is harmony of people with nature, and at the top is the harmony of people with the spirit or the spiritual. So amazingly, these 3 harmonies are perfectly aligned with the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And I think Osaka was the host for G20 last year, and I think you have been amazing in bringing the Sustainable Development Goals into that efforts. And many Tokyo University and many leaders here have, and the community have been working towards this happiness that we hope we can all achieve. Next slide, please. So this next slide is about the Trihita Karana. Sorry, the pyramid earlier is actually based on a Balinese philosophy, the Trihita Karana, which means the 3 ways to happiness. And 3 is the number 3. Hita is happiness, and Karana in other ways. So, and we would like to actually synthesize a lot of the discussions today into, I think, how can we use this ancient philosophy that is aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, and look at how technology can have a compass. And this is created by a Harvard researcher who is also working with IEEE and MIT. There is this Council of Extended Intelligence. And so I think what they have proposed is the Trihita Karana compass of awareness-based technology, so that technology will also be looking at the merging of the global with the local communities, the artistic with the scientific, the economic with the spiritual. And how do we, the lack of balance of which would have impact, the technosphere, the biosphere, ethnosphere, so that you can have that harmony of across the 3 on the people, planet, and spirit. So I think I just want to close by saying that we, in our own efforts in our foundation, I think we are also working on a prototype in Bali to create this whole island development, as well as a campus at the heart of it to promote these works. And we are very delighted to have Tsinghua University, Southeast Asia Center there, and we are also going to have IEEE and MIT Council of Extended Intelligence headquartered there. And tomorrow, I think your president of Tokyo University will meet with the Indonesian government. We also look for collaboration. So the word cyber actually comes from the Greek word cybernetics, and it actually means stewardship. So we are actually amazingly talking about the stewardship of the commons. And thank you for this opportunity to present. Thank you.
Sherry, thank you so much, and what a wonderful way to not just to finish the panel and I think finish the forum. I mean, what a dazzling panel, right? From technological S-curves and disruptions to inferential intelligence to astonishing visualization of big data, and then I have to say my heart is with the way we closed the panel with Sherry, because this only makes sense. Right? It only is in service to, I think, our shared humanity if we put it within the framework of bringing people and planet and spirituality together in an integrated model that leads to harmony between these elements. And so I'm going to stop there. I feel like that's a very, very appropriate place to close and hand back to the organizers of the forum. But let me end by thanking all the panelists for what an incredible session. So thank you all.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jeremy. So we come to our final session, which is a conversation with the youth. climate justice, generational justice. These are the words we are hearing more and more frequently these days. The heightened demand for justice is changing behavior of corporations and governments, and they're starting to take action. So it is particularly important to hear the voices of the youth and also to create venues for their participation to design their own future. We are joined by 6 university students, 3 from Tokyo and 3 in Seoul. And from here, we'd like to hear their voices after listening to the Tokyo Forum 2020. I would like to ask each and every student to introduce themselves before making their comments. Thank you all for joining us. And my first question is, what is your takeaway from listening to the 2-day Tokyo Forum 2020? Let me start with students in Tokyo. Who wants to go first? Okay, please introduce yourself.
Okay, thank you. Hello, my name is Shoko Kawase, and I am a 3rd grade student majoring in agricultural economics. And so shall I start?
Please.
Okay. Thank you for having us students here and giving us the precious opportunity to join the forum and this student discussion session. And so the biggest takeaway from the session for me is that the importance of empathy in the society to make the systematic change. And as was mentioned in the panel 1 yesterday, the message that we need to practice the regenerative agriculture and restore the habitats of wildlife was impressive message for me. And as having been born and raised up in Japan, I have a little knowledge of the state of food insecurity. But as was mentioned also yesterday, the COVID-19 brought the hunger pandemic around the world. So like we now really need to change our values and our economic systems to make the world more sustainable. And also one of the powerful messages from the panel 3 today was that we need the solution. We know the solution, and what we need now is to implement those solutions. So like as a student majoring in agriculture, I want to pursue what I can do to contribute for the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Kawase-san. Now I'd like to go to Seoul, and who would like to make the comment first? Please.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Ha Young, majoring in economics and global environmental management in Seoul National University. First of all, I want to, it is a great honor to take part in this forum and to listen to inspirational and powerful messages from leaders around the world. So my key takeaway from over the 2 days of the forum was well, let me start again. Okay, so it was really optimistic to see the changes, positive changes in businesses and governments. However, as Professor Jung mentioned today, current supply-driven system needs a fundamental systemic change towards a demand-driven bottom-up approach, internalizing the environmental issues so each one of us can truly realize that it is our responsibility to deal with the problem. Yeah, that's the main takeaway I had from the forum. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I'll switch over to Tokyo now. Who wants to go next? Okay.
So my name is Momado Mitsu, and I'm in the third year in the Faculty of Law. And since my major is kind of philosophy, so I would like to make a brief comment from that perspective. So I would like to recall the discussion in the panel 3 today. So in that panel, almost all the panelists agreed to the point that the interconnection among all human sectors is essential, right? And so by global common stewardship, I understand the attempt to internalize our political, economic, and technological world. But like philosophically speaking, the process of internalization itself can be a problem. Throughout the history, we were constantly creating the outside and then negating the outside in order to secure the inside. So if we succeed in some like generation later, to succeed in constructing a system that successfully internalizes all our human social systems, then what we really need to care about is that the very possibility that there will be another externality, the completely new target for negation. So I think this is something that philosophers have to work on as a next problematic. Yeah.
Great, this needs some deep thinking for me. Thank you very much. Now to Seoul. Who would like to speak next?
Yes. Hi, my name is Heron Clara Yu from Yonsei GSIS. I study international trade, finance, and management. And my key takeaway from this Tokyo Forum, from the wonderful speakers, the world-class panels, is that the concept of stewardship itself was very meaningful, because it is stewardship, not ownership, that we should have towards the global commons, and we should be aware that we should coexist with the global natural resources. We don't own them. We have. We should share with the global natural resources, and hence it was very important. The important message from Christiana Figueres was that we might reach the limit of planetary boundaries by 2030, and this gave me a strong message that we might be the last generation to tackle these issues. And I was really happy to see the current practices, such as carbon neutrality by governments by 2050 or 2060, and even companies are doing ESG practices. And I felt as a member of civil society that we should be more aware of reducing landfill waste and also focus on ESG investment, so that even individual movements can come together as a collective movement, and then hence we would learn how to coexist with the planet.
Okay, thank you. And our final participant in Tokyo.
Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity to take part in the Tokyo Forum 2020. My name is Alexine, and I'm from the Philippines, and I'm a fourth-year undergraduate at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences. And my key takeaway from this forum is the importance of stepping boundaries and also protecting boundaries. So it was established that our tipping point is at 2030, and that is not a lot of time. We only have a decade. And we see that there's a lot of criticism on governments and on corporations on how they manage these systems and on how they provide open access to the less privileged, for example. And I think that really came out in the panel for the Cyber Global Commons, because we know that in a lot of technologies, there are biases embedded in, for example, algorithms and machine learning and artificial intelligence. So we need to make sure that the processes by which these technologies are disseminated throughout the world are democratized. And that doesn't just come from the top-level officials and CEOs. It also comes from civil society demanding change and holding governments and businesses accountable. Thank you.
Thank you. And let me go to Seoul.
Yes. Hi. It's an honor to be here. My name is Choi Young-ji, student of Seoul National University. I'm double majoring in painting and Western history and minor in first environmental science. My takeaway from today's forum is immediate action we should take as a team. In Johan Rockström and Christiana Refurge's speech, they said that we are close to irreversible limit and also emphasize with the immediate action because what we do now decides the future in 2030. That's not for a very near future, but we can change this crisis to opportunity through partnership and collaboration. In order to do so, we have to understand each side, such as many other countries, and government, society, company, and individual, or experts and citizens. There are many people who don't know or care about this emergency, and that's make people have more anxiety, just as people felt when they saw the natural disaster of 2020. So to reduce the gap through a middle road is very important, such as multilateralism, education institution, and forum like this Tokyo Forum. It should be inform us of real risk and deliver with recent research and create a forum to think about what we should do or how we can do help. And through this middle law, we can act together. Thank you.
Thank you for those encouraging comments. And I think I'd like to go to one more question. If each and every one of you can think of one action that you might want to take after listening to the two-day forum. Maybe shall I start with Seoul this time? Who wants to go first? What would you like to do? What areas of you would like to take action in, or since you're now feeling the urgency of transformation?
After listening to the forum, I've realized the importance of internalizing the current challenges and own it like individual level so that we can act to deal with the problem that we are currently facing. But more importantly, I guess it is important for countries to cooperate, as we emphasize throughout the forum. And I want to mention Vera Songi's message that Africa is a continent full of opportunities for developed countries to cooperate, to invest in new technology, clean technology. And yeah, this reminded me of leapfrogging of environmental degradation and how we can cooperate to achieve further and to create synergy with different stakeholders. Yes, thank you.
So you want to be involved in international development? Okay. Okay, well, let's go to Tokyo. Kawase-san, you want to start?
Yes. So I am currently working as a volunteer at a food bank in my hometown, and there I am working with many different generations of people, from high school students to me, university student, to those people in 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and above 60s. And the reason why I mentioned this is because I think it's really important to include more all the ages of people in the discussion of protecting the global commons and making actions. And to include more people in those movements, what I can do is to tell about today's forum and share what I learned from the forum with my friends and my families. And so, in addition to that, keep thinking about what I can do and what we can do to make the systematic change in the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Who wants to go next from Seoul?
Okay, I'll go next.
Okay.
So the first thing that comes into my mind is to use less plastic. It's because prevention is the most certain and the less costly measure and action we can take. Hence, I think if we prevent and if we can use less plastic, then that would be great for our planet's health, because if we take care of the planet will take care of us. And it is known that 8% of the oil stock is used for production of plastic. And in this process, lots of GHG emissions come out. And hence, if we use less plastic, if we consume less, then the production would be less. Hence, I believe that if we use less plastic in our everyday lives, and if this individual action comes together in a group level, in a national level, then it would definitely prevent any further disasters. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And?
So as for myself, as a philosophy student, I would like to I would like to keep thinking as to how we can come up with the new ontology in today's world. So I just mentioned the relationship between the external and internal, but like this relationship actually comes from the basic ontological standard within which we have so long been trapped from the modern era. According to that ontology, we all want to make sure of the identity and integrity of our being, and we will do that by negating the others, negating that which is not suitable to the integrity of our being. So I think this kind of ontology won't work anymore. We should get out of the framework of identity and integrity, right? We are not being, but we are becoming. So we are like becoming with others. So right now, the transition from ontology of being to ontology of becoming is a particularly new topic in the field of contemporary thought, but there definitely is a lot to think about. So in future, as a philosopher, I would like to take a part in that movement.
Great. Thank you. And from Seoul, the last participant.
Okay. As a student who study Earth environmental science, the most effective way we could save our planet and to preserve global commons is to go green. Reforestation is something that I'm really passionate about, and this could be the most natural way to put a break in global warming. As the trees go through photosynthesis, absorbing carbon dioxide, and by providing more oxygen, that actually can be carbon reservoir. Also, to come up with the technology to match the right seedlings to right soil, and by providing financial benefits while managing them, will raise awareness and interest on going green. So we have to develop the technology and create the systems to connect this organic carbons to business such as carbon credits. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally?
My major is in Japan and East Asia Studies, and throughout my studies, which is very interdisciplinary, I've studied the connections between society, politics, technology, and science, and how access to information and education is very unequal in our society and in the global society as a whole. So for example, academia can be very ivory tower and very exclusionary, especially to people in developing countries who cannot afford these these groundbreaking technologies that can really help towards global stewardship for the global commons. However, I think as a civil society, we also have the power to put our feet down on the ground and tell those in power and those who have the resources that they also need to listen to us. And I think for me personally, because studying history and politics, you kind of get this depressing outlook. And you think, oh no, there's no hope for us at all. But I think that's not really a helpful kind of framework to live by. And as someone who's interested in possibly pursuing a career in journalism or communication studies, I want to make sure that information and education is accessible to everyone. Because everyone, I think, when confronted with this threat, this climate threat, they would want to do something actionable. And I think one way that we can do this is by creating this, by making sure that this education is free, accessible to everyone. And this is very apparent in the Cyber Global Commons, which is at the nexus of this conversation about open source, open access. And I think it's a very important stage of technology and society studies that we're at right now, because the technologies are developing so rapidly, and we have to ensure that societal justice catches up to this technological rapid development. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all those takeaways and what you want to be doing to participate in the transformation. I think we have been talking in the Tokyo Forum that there are positive signs for change, but not enough scale and speed. So please be vocal and please take part in it. Thank you all for participating. That concludes the student session. Now, we have come to the end of the Tokyo Forum. And before we close, I'd like to have a closing remark by Makoto Gonokami, the president of Tokyo University.
Thank you for the introduction. I was excited to hear directly students' voices, both from Korea and Japan, representing the next generation. I want to thank the many students who joined us during these 2 days. I was very encouraged to hear that students understood the scientific urgency of safeguarding the global commons and were willing to tackle this great challenge. Many speakers strikingly pointed out that our time limit for climate action is 2030, not 2050. We have not a moment to lose. All generations must collaborate. The younger generation transcending borders and acting together will make a great difference. In my 30 years of life as a physics professor, I enjoyed learning together with many excellent students from across the globe. The network we share is extremely valuable, especially in this time of great global change. The student session reminded us that international collaboration among diverse individuals is precious and has great potential. I sincerely hope Tokyo Forum will continue to provide such an opportunity. We live in a very difficult time of great changes and challenges. But let us take this as an opportunity to enjoy the collaboration in increasing a shared future. Now it is time to close the event. Distinguished guest speakers and participants around the world, I would like to thank you for attending the Tokyo Forum 2020 online. Thanks to your participation, we can conclude this year's forum successfully. This will be my last Tokyo Forum as president of the University of Tokyo. The great success of this year's forum has reconfirmed for me the importance of joint dialogue between Japanese and Korean academics for discussing the future and making new proposals with leaders in various fields from across the globe. Furthermore, this forum is becoming a platform to strengthen academia's commitment to global society. In parallel with this forum, I organized international meetings with university presidents to discuss academia's role in shaping future society. Many pointed out the importance of interdisciplinary and multilateral collaborations, especially with companies tackling social issues globally. I hope to strengthen our tie with business leaders who join this forum and share this view. This year's forum is the second in a series that will continue at least for 10 years. I strongly hope that under the leadership of our new president, the next Tokyo Forum will also be a place of positive and constructive discussions for our shared future. Finally, I am most grateful for Dr. Naoko Ishii, who is responsible for creating this year's program, Ms. Hiroko Kuniya for moderating this entire two-day forum, Mr. Che Tae-won, chairman of SK Group, and Park In-kuk, president of Che Institute for Advanced Studies, for their support and encouragement in organizing this event. Thank you very much. I look forward to a long partnership with all of you.
Thank you, President Gonokami. Next, the closing remarks by the president of Che Institute, Park In-kuk. President Park, please.
President Gonokami, distinguished participants, I wish to express my deepest thanks to all of you for your participation in the second Tokyo Forum. I also reiterate my profound gratitude to the University of Tokyo for their impeccable preparation for this new type of forum. It must have entailed arduous efforts to tide over technical complexities and the unprecedented format under the COVID-19 pandemic. The first Tokyo Forum last year was a resounding success, marshaling almost 150 world-leading scholars and experts to share their visions and insight for the better future. Shaping the future, the overarching theme of this forum reflects our resolution to navigate out of growing uncertainties fogging the world. As Abraham Lincoln said, the best way to predict our future is to create it. And this year, of many forces shaping the future, we decided to focus on environmental issues, or more broadly, global commons. The United Nations Conference on the Human Environment in 1972 placed environmental issues at the forefront of international agenda for the first time in history. Since the Stockholm Declaration, the international community has worked toward preserving and enhancing the global environment for the past 50 years. Since the 1992 UN Conference on Environmental Development in Rio de Janeiro, sustainability became a key driver of global environmental efforts. And from 2016, Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, have revitalized a strong global partnership and served as a blueprint for policy decisions. Especially, the International Panel on Climate Changes, or IPCC, has provided scientific evidence and research-based advice to shape international discourse on climate issues, putting forward policy options. As a nexus between science and global governance, the IPCC has set an example of multilateral cooperation even in the time of Cold War. The IPCC assessment are key inputs into the international negotiations to tackle climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, as the title Global Commons suggests, Earth and its environment are a global asset and a public good. Historically, the global public goods have played pivotal roles in sustaining peace and stability across the international community. In the early 1930s, the United States replaced the United Kingdom as the world-leading hegemonic power, but the US was not prepared to provide global public goods at that time. Coined as Kinderberg Trap by Professor Joseph Nye at Harvard University, the Charles Kinderberger, the leading architect of Marshall Plan, asserted that the failure to provide public goods in the 1930s by the United States led to the, I quote, collapse of the global system into depression, genocide, and World War, unquote. Today, the international community is in dire need of a wide range of public goods. Among these public goods, the environment is without doubt the most critical and will determine quality of our lives as well as prosperity of future generations. With its inauguration next month, the Biden administration is expected to reinstate multilateral dialogue and cooperation on environmental issues. President-elect Biden promised to restore the US position as a leader in the fight against climate change, including rejoining the Paris Agreement. I hope that today's Tokyo Forum, under the name of Global Common Stewardship, will trigger a new momentum under these new developments. I'd like to draw your special attention that during this round of Tokyo Forum, the engagement of the private sector has been emphasized as an indispensable element to achieve our common goals. It is argued that the business should focus on ESG, that is environment, society, and governance, not just on profits. In conclusion, I take pride that the University of Tokyo and Chei Institute for Advanced Studies have successfully co-hosted this august event through watertight communication and cooperation. Taking this opportunity, I'd like to reaffirm Chei Institute's unswerving commitment to this historic intellectual cooperation with the University of Tokyo under the shared mission of the shaping the future. I thank you.
President Park, thank you very much. As we have been repeating, humanity stands at a critical juncture, and the path for transforming is complex and difficult. And we don't know what the correct path is, but we have to do is mobilize the best in us. Every one of us has to mobilize the best in us. Naoko-san, the forum is coming to a close, and as the content producer for this forum, what are your final thoughts?
Thank you. When we decide that what would be this forum's topic, we actually took a huge risk of choosing global commons and in Anthropocene, because these two words are not really well known, and there is advice not to really go that far. But I think that then we took it, and I think we won that battle. We won that gamble, maybe. As you mentioned, many people mentioned, the timeline was one of the biggest takeaway for the last 2 days. The goal is not 2050, but it's going to be 2030. After 2030, we will lose the control over that process. That emphasized the importance of implementation. Particularly for today's discussion, we try to see how we could really provide this in practical methods. And I think the Center for Global Commons, together with many, many partners, are really trying to provide that practical method. But to me, the biggest reward is actually the voices from students. You hear that, and they have started to embrace that concept, and with very clear understanding that what they can do individually and with their distinct role in it. So that was maybe the happiest moment to me for the last 2 days. But I just lastly, I really want to say to you, Kuniya-san, it was my real honor and pleasure to actually stand next to you for the last 2 days. And I believe our journey together will continue till the time we find that then our future be secured. Thank you so much.
Naoko-san, the pleasure was mine, and thank you very much for inviting me to take part in this forum. But it is a daunting realization that we can no longer take the resilience of the planet for granted, that we have to be effective stewards of the planet Earth. And that realization is really just overwhelming, but we have to take the challenge and we have to make it doable. So I hope viewers who have been watching the 2-day session, that they at least were able to share with us the sense of urgency, and that they will think about doing anything that they can and think about and telling other people about their urgency.
We were all in together.
Yes. So thank you all for participating, viewing the Tokyo Forum 2020 online. And for all of us here in Tokyo, and for our co-host in Seoul, we'd like to say good night, and please stay safe.